Cardboard boxes. A whole kingdom of them. They rose in brown, blocky towers all around me, filling every corner of our new life. The air smelled of dust, tape, and the faint, sweet scent of the house's old wood. I was sitting on the hardwood floor, my back against a teetering stack labeled Kitchen Fragile. The phone felt cool in my hand. "He's in full-on nesting mode," I typed to Chloe. You'd think he was building the Taj Mahal, not just assembling an IKEA bookshelf. A beat. I added an eye-roll emoji. A reply came back almost instantly. "Let him have his fun. You got the house. Send pics." I aimed the phone's camera up, capturing the vaulted ceiling with its exposed beams. It was the reason we drained our savings. A real, honest-to-God suburban dream. My dream. Ethan's dream. Ours. I sent the picture. A sudden draft slid across the back of my neck. Cold. Too cold for a closed-up house in late August. I shivered. A quick, involuntary twitch. My thumb hovered over the screen. I scanned the room. The windows were shut tight. The front door was latched. Still, the feeling lingered, like an open freezer door in the next room. Old house, I muttered to myself. Drafty as hell. I dismissed it. An old house has quirks. That's what gives it character. That's what we paid for. Looks gorgeous, Chloe's text came through. But also a shitload of work. You need wine. Stat. I smiled. She was right. That night the dream came. It wasn't a story. It was a place. A long hallway. The walls were made of a dark, slick stone that wept with moisture. Water dripped from somewhere above, a steady, maddening rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was too loud, too close. I was barefoot. The floor was gritty and cold beneath my feet. I wasn't alone. I never saw anything. I just knew. A presence. Something shuffling in the dark, just beyond my vision, its weight pressing in on the narrow space. I just walked. I had to keep walking. Ethan was there. I couldn't see him either, but I felt his panic, a thrumming hum that vibrated through the stone floor and into my bones. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something else. Something like rotting meat. I woke up with a gasp, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was dark, but it was our room. The air was still. Ethan was breathing softly beside me, a steady, peaceful sound. Just a dream. A stress dream. Moving was stressful. New house. New mortgage. It made sense. I forced my heart to slow down. I listened to his breathing until my own matched its rhythm, and I fell back into a shallow, dreamless sleep. The morning sun streamed through the bare windows, painting bright squares on the floor. The smell of coffee was already in the air. Ethan was a maniac about his morning coffee. I found him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter he had cleared with surgical precision amidst the chaos. He smiled when he saw me. "Morning," he said, handing me a mug. It was warm. Comforting. "Sleep okay?" "Like a rock," I lied, no reason to dump a weird dream on him. "You?" He took a sip from his own mug, his brow furrowed for a second. Weird. I had the strangest dream, just a long, wet hallway. Felt like I was walking for miles. The mug in my hand suddenly felt very cold. I stopped it just before it touched my lips. My throat went dry. "A hallway?" I kept my voice light, casual. "Yeah, dark. Water dripping everywhere." He shrugged, the moment passing. "Must be this house. New place, new noises, brains do weird things." He waved a hand around at the boxes. "Anyway, I'm going to tackle the bedroom closet before work. Want to help me brainstorm a shelving system?" "Sure," I said, my voice a little too high. "Just let me wake up first." He laughed and disappeared back towards the bedroom. I stood alone in the kitchen, the coffee forgotten. Coincidence, I told myself. It had to be a coincidence. We were both stressed. We'd both been hauling heavy boxes down the actual hallway of our new house all weekend. The subconscious is a stupid, literal thing. It probably just latched onto the same image for both of us. It meant nothing. I took a long drink of coffee. It tasted bitter. I followed him into the bedroom a few minutes later. He'd taken his t-shirt off to work, his back to me as he measured the inside of the closet. The sunlight from the window cut across his shoulders, and that's when I saw it. I froze in the doorway. "Ethan!" My voice was flat. "Yeah?" He didn't turn around. His focus was on the tape measure. "What happened to your back?" "My back? What are you talking about?" he grunted, pulling the tape taut. 72 inches. We could fit a double rod in here. "Ethan, turn around." He finally let the tape measure retract with a loud zip and turned to face me. "What is it?" I walked toward him, my eyes fixed on his left shoulder blade. There, stark against his skin, were 3 thin parallel lines. They were a bright, angry red, like a cat scratch, but longer and perfectly spaced. They looked deliberate. "What the hell is that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I reached out but stopped my hand an inch from his skin. He turned his head, trying and failing to see it over his own shoulder. He walked to the full-length mirror we had leaning against the wall. His expression went from confusion to surprise. "Whoa, I have no idea." "What do you mean you have no idea? That looks like it hurts." "It doesn't," he said, touching the marks gingerly with his own fingers. "I don't feel a thing." He looked at me in the mirror, his eyes searching. "Must have been when we were moving that heavy dresser. I probably scraped it on a corner and didn't even notice." He tried to make it sound plausible. We both knew it wasn't. We'd moved the dresser 2 days ago. A scratch like that would have shown up then, or it would have started to heal. This was fresh. Raw. "I didn't hear you get up last night," I said, a new thought pushing its way into my mind. A sick, twisting thought. "I didn't," he said, turning from the mirror. He looked genuinely baffled. "I was out cold till my alarm went off." "You know I was." We stood there in the bright, sunny room, the silence stretching between us. The happy energy of the morning was gone, replaced by a strange, heavy tension. Something was wrong. This was wrong. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly feeling the chill from last night again. I looked down at my own arms, half expecting to see matching marks. Nothing. My skin was clear. "It's just weird," he said finally, breaking the quiet. He forced a smile. "Guess this old house is fighting back." He said it as a joke, but neither of us laughed. He pulled a clean t-shirt on, hiding the scratches from view. But I couldn't unsee them. They were burned into my mind. 3 perfect, red lines. The rest of the day felt off balance. We tried to push past it. We talked about shelving and paint colors. We went to work. But the image of the scratches and the memory of our shared dream hovered at the edge of every conversation. An unspoken question mark. That afternoon, I decided to take control. To erase the weirdness with productivity. I started with the bed. It was time for fresh sheets, a symbolic cleansing. I pulled the fitted sheet off the mattress, a cloud of dust motes dancing in the sunlight. The comforter was already in a heap on the floor. I gathered the sheet into a ball. As I did, something small and hard fell out onto the mattress. It made a tiny tick sound. I stopped. I stared at it. It lay on the white surface of the mattress protector, small and curved. I leaned in closer. My breath caught in my throat. It was a fingernail. A broken piece of a fingernail. My first thought was that it was mine. I quickly checked my hands. All 10 of my nails were short, neat, and painted a pale pink. Intact. I thought of Ethan. He kept his nails clipped brutally short, a nervous habit. This wasn't his. This nail was long, longer than I would ever grow mine. It was thick, slightly curved, and had a sickly yellowish tint to it, like old ivory. The broken edge was jagged, sharp. I stood there, staring at this small, impossible object. Where had it come from? Hotshot, Gigopa. The hallway, the dream, the dark, damp stone, the feeling of not being alone, the sound of shuffling, the scratches on Ethan's back. 3 long, parallel lines. My mind made the connection in a terrifying, lightning-fast leap. A claw. Something had clawed him in his sleep. In our dream. And it had left a piece of itself behind. In our bed. My heart began to pound, a frantic, panicked drum against my ribs. My eyes darted around the sunlit room, the open closet, the space under the bed, the door to the hallway. Everything looked normal, mundane, just a bedroom, half unpacked. But it felt different now, violated. I should have screamed. I should have called Ethan. I should have picked it up with a tissue and shown it to him. Proof that we weren't crazy, that something had happened. But I didn't. A cold, deep dread settled in my stomach, overriding the panic. An instinct for self-preservation that was quieter, more insidious. To acknowledge it was to make it real. To show it to Ethan was to invite the terror into the light. Right now, it was my secret. My horror. My hand moved on its own. I snatched the small, curved piece of nail from the mattress. Its texture was hard and smooth, like a piece of plastic. I didn't look at it. I walked quickly, silently, out of the bedroom and into the small bathroom. I opened the lid of the trash can, dropped it in among some used cotton balls and an empty toothpaste box, and let the lid fall shut. Then I washed my hands. I scrubbed them with hot water and soap until my skin was red. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale. My eyes were wide. It wasn't his. It wasn't mine. So who had been in our bed last night? Hiwan Horley. The quiet was the worst part. We had filled the house with our things, boxes stacked like monuments to a life we were supposed to be building, but the silence between us was bigger than all of it. After I threw the fingernail away, I didn't tell Ethan. I couldn't. Admitting it out loud felt like handing in an invitation, a key to the front door. So I said nothing. I walked around with the secret lodged in my throat, a hard little stone of dread. Ethan tried to work. He set up his monitors on the dining room table, a temporary command center in a sea of cardboard. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, pretending to search for the coffee filters I knew we hadn't unpacked yet. He sat staring at a wall of code on the screen, but his fingers weren't moving. His head was cocked slightly to the side. He was listening. We were both always listening now. A loud creak echoed from upstairs. Ethan's whole body went rigid. His eyes flicked up toward the ceiling. It was just a noise, an old house noise, the kind of thing a realtor calls character. But it wasn't just a noise anymore. Every pop, every groan of the floorboards was a question. He pushed his chair back, the sound scraping harshly on the wood floor. "I'm just going to check," he said. His voice was too casual. "It's just the house settling, Ethan." I said it, but my own words felt hollow. "I know. Just want to make sure a pipe didn't burst or something." A thin excuse. We both knew it. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the slow, deliberate tread as he walked the length of the upstairs hallway. The same hallway from the dream. I stayed in the kitchen, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. I heard him stop. Silence. Then his footsteps came back down, faster this time. He came back into the dining room, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Nothing, just the wind. There was no wind. The air outside was still and heavy, the sky a flat, hazy gray. He sat back down at his computer and tried to work. The silence returned, heavier this time, strained. I knew what he was thinking because I was thinking it too. The thing with the claws had been in our bed. The scratches on his back were real. We were sleeping in a crime scene, and we were the only victims. The rest of the day bled away in this tense quiet. We unpacked boxes with a kind of grim determination, as if normal activity could build a wall against the weirdness. We didn't talk about the dream. We didn't talk about the scratches. We spoke about where the towels should go, what to have for dinner, mundane things that felt like a language from another world. Every time our hands brushed, we both flinched. The easy intimacy we'd had just days ago was gone, replaced by a field of invisible static. Sleep was a threat now, a punishment we hadn't earned. That night, we left the bedside lamp on, a small, stupid rebellion against the darkness. We lay on our own sides of the bed, a canyon of mattress between us, staring at the ceiling. "I can't do this, Sarah," Ethan whispered into the room. "I know." We didn't need to say what this was. We both knew. The waiting, the dread. Knowing that we had to close our eyes eventually. Knowing what would be waiting for us when we did. I must have drifted off, because the world dissolved. I was standing in our living room. The lamp was on, casting that same weak yellow light. But everything was wrong. The boxes were gone. The furniture was gone. It was just an empty room. The air was cold. My feet were bare on the hardwood. I was not alone. I turned. It was there, standing in the archway to the dining room. It was tall. Impossibly tall. A long, thin silhouette of a man. But it wasn't a man. Its limbs were too long, jointed at odd, sharp angles like a starved insect. Its head almost scraped the top of the archway. It was pure black, a tear in the fabric of the room. I couldn't see a face, but I felt it looking at me. It took a step. No sound. It just glided forward, covering the distance with an unnatural speed. I tried to scream. No sound came out. My throat was locked tight. I tried to run. My legs were stone, my feet welded to the floor. Panic was a physical thing, a hot spike in my chest. I saw Ethan across the room, by the front door, his back to me. He was fumbling with the lock, his hands shaking. "Ethan!" I tried to yell, but only a choked gasp escaped. The shadow thing glided past me, ignoring me completely. It was moving toward him. Its long, stick-like arm reached out. The fingers were like razors, long and thin. I was ripped from the dream with a violent gasp. My eyes snapped open. I was in bed. The lamp was on. I was drenched in cold sweat. My heart a wild drum against my ribs. I wasn't the only one. Ethan was sitting bolt upright next to me, his chest heaving. He was staring at the bedroom door, his face a mask of pure terror. We both turned to look at each other at the same instant. His eyes were wide, pupils blown. "The living room," he choked out, his voice raw. It was in the house. I could only nod, my own breath coming in ragged bursts. A sob built in my chest, a pressure that had to get out. "The tall thing?" he asked, his voice shaking so badly the words trembled. "You saw it too?" That's when I broke. The sob tore out of me, loud and ugly in the quiet room. I couldn't hold it back. It wasn't relief. It was confirmation. This was real. This was happening to us. "Ethan!" I cried, the single word ripped apart by another sob. I held up my right arm, showing him. "Ethan, look." He leaned closer, his eyes squinting in the dim light. Then his breath hitched. He saw them. There, on my bicep, were 5 dark shapes. 5 distinct, ugly purple bruises, stark against my pale skin. They were arranged in a perfect arc, the exact size and shape of a hand. A huge hand, its grip impossibly strong. A hand that had been holding me down in the dream. He stared, his face draining of all color. He reached out a trembling finger, stopping just short of touching the marks. "No," he whispered. "No, this can't." He scrambled back, pulling at the collar of his t-shirt, his movements frantic. He ripped the shirt up over his head. I stopped crying, I just stared. There, splashed across his chest, were 3 new scratches. They weren't like the ones on his back. These were deeper, angrier. 3 jagged red lines from his collarbone down to his sternum. They looked like he'd been swiped at, like he'd been running from something with claws. We just looked at each other, the bruises on my arm, the cuts on his chest. It was undeniable. It wasn't a dream. It was an attack. The proof was written on our bodies. The thing in the house, the tall, black shadow, it could touch us. It could hurt us. And the bed, the blankets, the locked doors, none of it could protect us. Ethan slid off the bed. He didn't say a word. He walked into our bathroom, the one connected to the bedroom. He shut the door. The click of the latch was deafening. I sat there, alone, hugging myself. The skin on my arm throbbed with a dull ache. The ghost of that grip was still there. I listened. I heard the faucet turn on, a hard splash of water. Then it shut off. Silence. A minute passed. It felt like an hour. The door stayed closed. "Ethan?" I called out, my voice thin. "Are you okay?" No answer. I got off the bed, my legs shaky. I walked to the bathroom door. My own reflection, a pale, scared-looking ghost in its dark wood. I put my hand on the cold brass knob. "Ethan?" The door flew open so fast I stumbled back. He stood in the doorway, his face as white as the sink behind him. His eyes were wild, darting around the bedroom as if expecting to see something standing in the corner. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip tight. "It was in there," he hissed, his voice a low, frantic whisper. "What? What was in there?" I tried to look past him into the empty bathroom. The light was on. It was just a small room. Tiles, a mirror, a shower curtain. The sound. From the dream, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. They were filled with a terror I had never seen before. That buzzing, that static whisper, I heard it. He looked over my shoulder, into our bedroom, toward the dark hallway beyond. It was right in my ear. He let go of me, one hand coming up to touch the side of his own head. A shudder racked his entire body. "It's not just in the dream anymore, Sarah," he said, and his voice was dead, flat, all the fight gone out of it. It followed us out. We didn't sleep. How could we? After he'd said it, after the buzzing whisper in the bathroom, the night became a long, drawn-out vigil. We sat on the couch in the living room, the TV on but muted, its flickering blue light painting our faces. We didn't talk. We just watched the door to the hallway. We watched the windows. We listened to the house breathe around us. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the plumbing was a footstep, a presence. The sun came up, but it brought no relief. The gray morning light just made the shadows in the corners look deeper. We had to function. We had to pretend to be people who hadn't been mauled by their own nightmares. "I'll make breakfast," I said. My voice was a croak. Ethan just nodded, his eyes raw and bloodshot. He hadn't moved from his spot on the couch. He looked broken. A man hollowed out from the inside. I went into the kitchen. The act of pulling a skillet from an unpacked box felt monumental. I cracked eggs into a bowl. The sharp tap and split of the shells was too loud in the quiet house. I focused on the simple task. Whisk the eggs. Find the butter. Turn on the stove. Normal things. Things people did in their new houses. My arm ached, a deep, throbbing ache. I stopped whisking and looked down. The 5 bruises had darkened overnight. They weren't just purple anymore. They were a deep, violent, blackish blue, the skin around them swollen. A perfect handprint branded on my arm. A trophy from a monster. I pulled the sleeve of my sweatshirt down, hiding it. But I could still feel it. The ghost of its grip. I tried to cook. I tried to build a small wall of normalcy with bacon and eggs. But the smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of bacon frying. It was something else, creeping in from underneath. Not sewer gas. Not garbage. It was the smell of a forest floor after a hard rain. Wet earth. Rotting leaves. The deep, heavy scent of decay. It was the smell from the dream. The smell of the empty room where the shadow had stood. I turned off the stove. The sizzling died down, leaving a thick silence. "Do you smell that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ethan lifted his head from the couch. He sniffed the air once, twice. All the blood drained from his face. He knew the smell too. "It's probably just the pipes," he said. The words came out fast. Too fast, an excuse he didn't believe. "Old house. Probably a clog in the main drain or something. I'll check the basement." He stood up, a jolt of nervous energy making his movements jerky. He needed to do something. Anything. I knew that feeling. The desperate need to find a rational, physical cause for this thing that defied all logic. "Ethan, don't," I said. "It's fine, Sarah. It's just a basement." He walked toward the center of the house, to the narrow door I had barely noticed before, the basement door. The realtor had mentioned it was stubborn. Old wood, swollen in its frame. But it wasn't stubborn now. It was already open. Just a crack. A dark, vertical slit in the wall. He stopped. I saw his whole body tense up. We both stared at that crack of darkness. Neither of us had been near that door. "I'm just going to look," he said, his voice a low rasp. He was trying to convince himself, not me. He pushed the door open. It swung inward without a sound. A flight of steep, rickety-looking wooden stairs led down into blackness. The smell rolled out in a wave, thick and cloying. The smell of cold, wet dirt. He fumbled for a switch on the wall. A single, bare bulb flickered to life at the bottom of the stairs, casting long, skeletal shadows. "See?" he said, his voice echoing slightly in the stairwell. "Just a light bulb." He started down the steps. I stayed at the top, my hands gripping the door frame. My knuckles were white. Each step he took creaked, a loud protest in the silent house. I heard his feet hit the concrete floor at the bottom. I couldn't see him clearly, just his shape moving in the weak yellow light. "Anything?" I called down. My voice sounded thin and shaky. A pause. "No, it's clean." Another pause. "Wait a second." I held my breath. I could hear his footsteps moving to a far corner. "What is it?" I asked. "It's just wet over here." His voice came back, strained. "There's a puddle, and there are leaves in it." Leaves. My mind went blank. Why would there be leaves in the basement? The windows were high, small, and sealed shut with layers of old paint. "What kind of leaves?" "I don't know why," I asked. "I don't know. They're black. Rotted." I leaned forward, trying to see, to understand. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. Something was wrong. This was so wrong. He started walking back toward the stairs. "There's nothing here, Sarah. It's just a damp corner. We'll get a dehumidifier." That's when it happened. The door slammed shut. It wasn't a swing. It was a slam. A violent, deafening boom that shook the entire floor under my feet, as if a giant had kicked it. It threw me back a step. The light from the basement was gone. The hallway was plunged into an impossible darkness, the only sound my own sharp, terrified gasp. "Ethan!" I lunged for the doorknob. I twisted it, pulled. Nothing. It didn't budge. It felt like it was welded shut. Like the other side was a solid wall of steel. "Ethan! Are you okay?" I screamed, my voice shredding, a muffled shout from below. Then a thud. Then the sound of frantic scraping hands on the other side of the door. "It won't open!" His voice was a raw, panicked roar from the darkness. "Sarah, open the door!" "I'm trying!" I yelled, pulling with all my weight. I braced my feet against the wall and yanked, my muscles screaming. The brass knob was cold and unmoving in my sweaty palm. It was like trying to pull a mountain. "It's stuck. It's locked." I heard him throw his body against the door from the other side. A heavy, sickening thud, then another. The wood shuddered but didn't give. I could hear his breathing now, ragged and wet. He was hyperventilating. I could hear him sobbing, animal sounds of pure terror. "Get me out! Oh, God, Sarah, get me out!" I beat my fists against the hard wood. "I'm here, Ethan! I'm right here! I'm not leaving!" The banging stopped. The shouting stopped. Silence. A total, complete silence from the other side of the door. It was worse than the screaming. The world shrank to just this door, this horrible slab of wood between me and my husband. "Ethan?" I whispered, my cheek pressed against the door. "Ethan, can you hear me?" Nothing. My blood ran cold. Absolute dread, cold and sharp, pierced through my panic. It had him. The thing from the dream, the shadow. It was down there with him in the dark. I stood there for a second that stretched into an eternity, my mind a white-hot blank of fear. Then I heard it. A small click. The doorknob turned under my hand. The door swung inwards so easily, so silently, it almost pulled me off my feet. Ethan fell out. He didn't walk. He stumbled out of the darkness and collapsed onto the hallway floor in a heap, gasping for air like a drowning man. He was shaking from head to foot, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. His face was chalk white, his eyes wide and vacant with shock. "It's empty," he choked, pushing himself backward on his hands and knees, scrambling away from the open doorway. "There's nothing down there. It was just dark." I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands hovering, not knowing where to touch. "Are you hurt? Did you see anything?" He just shook his head, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders heaved with silent, shuddering sobs. I looked past him, down the stairs. The single bulb was still on. The concrete floor was bare. The corner was empty, just a damp spot on the floor. It was just a basement, an empty, stupid basement. "It's okay," I whispered, relief and confusion warring inside me. You're okay. We're okay. I put my hands on his back to help him up, and I froze. My fingers weren't touching the fabric of his t-shirt. They were touching something wet and gritty. I pulled my hands back. They were covered in thick black mud. My gaze traveled from my own dirty fingers to his back. He wasn't hurt. There were no new cuts, no bruises. But there, emblazoned across the gray cotton of his shirt, stark and undeniable, were two handprints. They were huge. The fingers were long and thin, splayed out in a way that wasn't human. They were made of the same wet, black, rotting earth from the puddle in the corner. One print was pressed flat between his shoulder blades. The other was on his lower back, as if something had been holding him or pushing him toward the stairs. We didn't talk about the handprints. I peeled the shirt off Ethan's back with careful, shaking fingers. The fabric was cold and heavy with the wet black soil. I balled it up and threw it in the kitchen trash can. Underneath, his skin was clean, unmarked. He scrubbed his own back raw in the shower while I stood outside the bathroom door, my ear pressed to the wood, listening to the water drumming against the tile. Listening for anything else. Sleep was not an option. It was the enemy. We made a pot of coffee, then another. The hours crawled by. We sat on the couch again, separated by a cushion that felt like a mile-wide trench. The TV was on, some old sitcom where everyone was laughing. The sound was off. The blue light flickered across our faces, making us look like ghosts. Every time my eyelids felt heavy, I would look at the hallway, at the basement door, now closed, at Ethan, and the fear would jolt me awake again. The sun started to come up, painting the gray sky outside the windows. A new day. It didn't feel like a relief. It felt like a countdown. We were running on fumes, our bodies screaming for rest, our minds screaming at them to stay awake. This was the new normal. Surviving the daylight hours, just to dread the night. I can't do this again, I said. My voice was a dry rasp. Ethan didn't look at me. He was staring at the coffee table, at nothing. We have to. We'll fall asleep eventually, Ethan. We can't stay awake forever. Then we sleep in shifts, he said, his tone flat, mechanical. I'll stay up. I'll watch. Watch for what? Watch me get torn apart in my sleep? The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. But what was the alternative? We were trapped. The exhaustion was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, my shoulders. My head lolled to the side. Just for a second. That's all it took. The blue light of the TV faded. The couch disappeared. I was back in the forest. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and rot. The trees were black skeletons against a bruised purple sky. I wasn't running this time. I was standing perfectly still, my feet sinking into the mud. I couldn't move. I saw it coming toward me from between the trees. The same tall, disjointed shadow. It moved without walking, gliding over the dead leaves. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I tried to scream, but my throat was sealed shut. It stopped a few feet in front of me. The darkness around it seemed to bend, to curdle. It slowly lifted a long, thin arm. I followed the movement, my eyes wide with terror. It was reaching for my face. No, not my face. My shoulder. And then the shadow's head tilted. The featureless void coalesced. It formed a nose, a mouth, eyes. It was Ethan's face. His eyes were cold, dead. But his mouth was stretched into a wide, cruel smile. The smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a mask of muscle and teeth. A predator's grin. He looked at me, at my terror. And the smile widened. He was enjoying this. He was savoring it. The hand, long and tipped with what looked like black thorns instead of fingers, came closer. I couldn't look away from his smiling face as the hand descended. He saw the tears streaming from my eyes. His smile grew, then the piercing pain. It plunged into my shoulder, a white-hot agony that ripped a silent scream from my lungs. I snapped awake with a gasp. My hand flew to my shoulder. My body was drenched in a cold sweat. Across from me, on the other end of the couch, Ethan jerked awake at the same moment, his own body lurching as if he'd been struck. He was panting, his eyes wild. He looked at me. For a moment, there was just shared terror in his eyes. Then his gaze dropped to my shoulder, where my hand was clutching the fabric of my sweatshirt. "Sarah," he said, his voice a choked whisper. I followed his gaze. A dark, wet circle was spreading through the gray cotton of my sleeve. It was blood. Slowly, my fingers trembling, I hooked a finger into the neck of my sweatshirt and pulled it down over my shoulder. It wasn't a scratch. It wasn't a bruise. It was a hole. A single, small, perfectly round puncture wound. It was deep and clean, like someone had hammered a thick, rusty nail into my flesh and pulled it straight out. Blood welled up from it, thick and dark. My head swam. This was real. The smile, the pain. It was real. My arm, Ethan breathed. I looked at him. He held out his left arm. I saw it immediately. 3 long, parallel gashes ran from his wrist almost to his elbow. They were deep, deeper than the scratches from the first night. The skin was peeled back in ragged flaps, the flesh underneath raw and angry. They looked exactly like something a cornered animal would do, like someone had raked their fingernails down his arm with all their strength. I stared at his wounds. He stared at mine. The air in the room became heavy, hard to breathe. I saw the gears turning in his head. I felt them grinding in my own. We didn't need to say it. That's what I did to you in my dream, I thought. That's what you did to me, his eyes screamed back. We moved like automatons. I got the first aid kit from the bathroom. I cleaned his arm, my fingers numb and clumsy. He winced, but didn't make a sound. His eyes never left me. He watched my every move as if I might suddenly lunge at him. When I was done, taping the gauze in place, he took the antiseptic wipes from my hand. He cleaned my shoulder. His touch was cold, clinical. Not the touch of a husband, the touch of a medic handling a stranger. We sat back on the couch, bandaged and broken. The silence was different now. It wasn't just tired silence. It was a charged, hostile silence. A wall of suspicion was building between us, brick by ugly brick. The thing didn't need to be in the room with us. It had found a better way. It was getting inside our heads. It was using us to hurt each other. Ethan finally broke the silence. He spoke so softly I almost didn't hear him. In the dream, he started, his voice cracking. He swallowed hard. It wasn't a shadow this time. It had your face. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. It held me down, he continued, staring at the floor. His hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists, and it clawed my arm. It was you, Sarah. I saw you. I flinched back as if he'd hit me. I slid further away on the cushion, putting more distance between us. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. I saw you too, I whispered. My own voice sounded alien to me, distant. He looked up at me, a flicker of something in his eyes. Hope? A plea for understanding? It had your face, I said, my voice getting stronger, harder. The image burned behind my eyes. The smile. That goddamn smile. You stabbed me. You plunged your hand into my shoulder, and you stood there watching me bleed. His face crumpled. No, I wouldn't. You did? The words ripped out of me, louder than I intended. And you were smiling, Ethan. Why were you smiling? You were enjoying it. You looked like you hated me. I would never, he yelled back, scrambling to his feet. He stood over me, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. That wasn't me. You know that wasn't me. It was you. Your eyes, they were just black pits. There was nothing there. My eyes were black because I was watching my husband murder me, I screamed, getting to my feet to face him. We stood there, in our new living room, in the cold morning light, shouting at each other like enemies. The first aid wrappers were still on the coffee table between us. The blood on the gauze was a testament to our accusations. Every rational part of my brain knew this was insane. It was a trick. The thing in this house was doing this to us, turning us against each other. But rationality was a million miles away. All I could see was his face contorted in a sneering smile. All I could feel was the phantom pain of his hand, tearing into my flesh. How do I know? I spit the words out, my voice shaking. How do I know it's not you? Maybe this whole thing is you. Maybe something in you is doing this. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and unforgivable. The anger drained from Ethan's face, replaced by a look of profound hurt. He looked at me as if he'd never seen me before. He took a step back. Then another. He looked from my face to my bandaged shoulder, then to his own bandaged arm. The connection was undeniable. The violence was perfect, tailored. My dream attacking him, his dream attacking me. The fight went out of us, replaced by something colder. Horror. He didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to say anything more. The damage was done. A line had been crossed. For the first time since we'd moved into this house, since this nightmare began, I was not afraid of the shadows in the corners. I was not afraid of the smell of wet earth, or the door to the basement. I was afraid of the man standing 10 feet away from me. I looked at my husband, the man I had promised to love and trust, and my mind betrayed me. For a split second, I didn't see his shocked, wounded face. I saw the smile. The silence was worse than the shouting. It settled over the house like a layer of fine, suffocating dust. We were two strangers in a waiting room, our fresh bandages stark white against our skin. Evidence. Exhibit A, the 3 deep gouges on his arm. Exhibit B, the neat, round puncture in my shoulder. I looked at him, and my throat closed up. The man I loved. The man whose face had worn a predator's smile. I had to get out. Not out of the house, not yet. Just out of this room. I needed air that hadn't been contaminated by our accusations. I stood up. My movements were stiff, robotic. Ethan flinched, his eyes tracking me. I pretended not to notice. "I'm going to do some weeding," I said. The word sounded stupid, insane. Weeding, after a night of shared psychic torture. But it was the only normal thing I could think of. I pulled on a long-sleeved work shirt, making sure the cuff covered the new bruises blooming on my wrist from where I'd grabbed myself in my sleep. I didn't look at him as I walked to the back door. I could feel his gaze on my back, a physical weight. The sunlight was harsh, unnaturally bright. It didn't feel cleansing. It felt like an interrogation lamp. I grabbed the small trowel and a bucket from the shed and knelt in the overgrown flower bed that ran along the side of the house. The soil was dark and damp, even though it hadn't rained. It smelled rich and wrong. It smelled like the dream. I dug the trowel in, yanking at stubborn weeds, the repetitive motion a weak shield against my thoughts. I ripped out a thick, pulpy root that looked more like a pale finger than a plant. I threw it in the bucket without a second thought. Just a weed. Get it out. My hands were caked in the black dirt. I kept digging, pulling, tearing, working until my shoulders ached and sweat ran down my temples. Anything to create a different pain. A real pain. One I could understand. "Settling in all right?" The voice made me jump so hard I dropped the trowel. It clattered against a stone. I looked up, hand flying to my chest, my heart hammering. An old woman was standing on the other side of the low, painted fence that separated our yard from the next. She was small and hunched, her face a road map of wrinkles. She held a pair of gardening shears. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you," she said, though her pale eyes didn't look sorry at all. They were sharp, assessing. They flicked from my face to the house and back again. "I'm Martha Gable. From next door." "Sarah," I managed, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Nice to meet you." "You've got your work cut out for you with that bed," she said, gesturing with her shears toward the dirt I was attacking. "Eleanor never could keep up with it." "Eleanor?" "The woman who lived here before. Before the last family, that is. The renters. They only lasted 6 months." Her gaze was fixed on the house now. There was a weird look on her face, a kind of morbid curiosity. "It's a lovely house. Solid bones." She paused, and her voice dropped to a lower, conspiratorial tone. "It just has a history." My blood went cold. I stopped pretending to weed. I just knelt there, frozen, the damp earth seeping through the knees of my jeans. Something in her tone told me this wasn't just small-town gossip. This was important. This was the sign. "A history?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Gable leaned closer over the fence. She looked left and right, as if checking for eavesdroppers in the empty yards. "People talk. You know how it is. But my husband, he was on the volunteer fire department back then. He saw it all." She took a slow, deliberate breath. "It was the Conroys. A young couple. A lot like you two, I imagine, young, in love, just bought their first home, a real picture. Her eyes bored into me. She knew she had me. The bay had been set. They'd only been here a year. He was a salesman of some kind, traveled a lot, started getting ideas in his head. Jealousy. The word hit me like a stone. I thought of the rage in Ethan's voice, the accusation. It was you, Sarah. He got it in his head that she was seeing someone while he was gone. Drove him mad, they said. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only listen as she methodically built the walls of the trap around me. One night, she continued, her voice a dry rustle of leaves, he came home early, found her asleep in bed, and he just snapped. She made a small, sharp motion with the shears. Snip. He used a hammer. Beat her to death right there, in the master bedroom. My stomach turned over. Our bedroom. The room where we woke up screaming, bleeding. And then, Mrs. Gable's eyes flicked toward our house, toward the dark rectangle of the basement window, barely visible above the ground. He went down to the basement, took a rope, and hanged himself from one of the main support beams. The world tilted. The sun felt cold. The smell of the earth was the smell of a grave. The basement, the door we both stared at, the place I imagined the handprints came from. The dreams, the violence, her in her sleep, him in the basement. It wasn't a haunting. It was a goddamn script. And we were the new actors. The police said it was one of the worst things they'd ever seen, she was saying, but her voice sounded far away, underwater. They say a house remembers something like that. That kind of violence. It stains the walls. She finally looked back at me, her expression a mask of pity. I just thought you should know. Be careful, dear. A house like this, it can play tricks on your mind. I scrambled to my feet. I don't remember saying goodbye. I don't think I said anything at all. I just turned and ran. I stumbled up the back steps, wrenched the door open, and slammed it behind me. I leaned against it, gasping for air, my heart trying to beat its way out of my rib cage. Ethan was in the living room, standing where I'd left him. He looked up, his face a mess of confusion and alarm. Sarah? What is it? What's wrong? The words tumbled out of me, a frantic, desperate flood. The neighbor? The old woman? She told me. The house? A couple? The Conroys? He killed her. Ethan? He killed her in her sleep. I pointed toward the hallway, toward our bedroom. Right in there! And then he went to the basement. He hanged himself in the fucking basement! I was panting, half sobbing, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I stared at him, my eyes wide with a terror so pure it burned. I expected to see that same terror mirrored on his face. I expected him to grab me, to say we had to get out, to call the police, to do something. But that's not what happened. Instead of panic, an incredible wave of relief washed over his features. He sagged against the wall, his whole body seeming to deflate. He closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath, a sound that was completely, horribly out of place. It was the sound of a man who had just been acquitted of a crime. See? He said, his voice soft, almost gentle. He opened his eyes, and they were clear. The fear was gone. See, Sarah? I told you. He pushed himself off the wall and walked toward me. It's not us, he said, his voice full of that same terrifying relief. It's the house. The whole time. It's just the house. He reached for me to pull me into a hug, to comfort me. But as his arms came around me, I went rigid. My skin crawled. The story from the old woman was horrifying. A nightmare made real. But this, his reaction was 1,000 times worse. He wasn't afraid. He was grateful. He was happy to have a ghost to blame. He was relieved that our shared nightmare, the wounds we gave each other, had an external source. It meant he wasn't the monster from my dream. It meant the smile I saw wasn't his. As he held me, trying to soothe me with soft murmurs, I stared over his shoulder at the bandaged gashes on his arm. The story didn't change what we saw. It didn't change what we felt. It didn't change the fact that in my dream, his hands had torn into my flesh, and he had enjoyed it. The story of the house wasn't our salvation. It was his alibi. And as I stood there in his arms, colder and more afraid than I had ever been, one thought cut through the panic. He wasn't afraid of the ghost. Why would he be? Maybe they were on the same side. His relief didn't fade. It festered. It sat between us at the kitchen table, a third person with a smug grin. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was a man who'd just gotten away with something. The ghost story was his get-out-of-jail-free card, and he was clutching it like a winning lottery ticket. He didn't talk to me. He talked to the internet. For hours, the only sound in the house was the frantic clicking of his fingers on the laptop keyboard. A frantic, desperate sound. He had a dozen tabs open. I could see the headlines from across the room. Residual hauntings, psychic echoes, curses, and how to break them. He was a man possessed, but not by a spirit. He was possessed by an idea, an excuse. "We need salt," he announced, not looking up from the screen. "Lots of it, and sage." I said nothing. I just watched him, my coffee growing cold in my hands. The puncture wound in my shoulder throbbed with a slow, deep beat. A drum reminding me of whose face I saw in the dark. It says here that a powerful emotional event, like a murder-suicide, can leave an imprint, he went on, his voice filled with the fervor of a new convert. The house just plays it back, like a recording. We're just caught in the playback. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide and bright. "It's not us, Sarah. Don't you see? We just have to cleanse the space. We have to break the loop." He was trying to convince himself as much as me. I could see it. He needed this to be true. If the house was the enemy, he wasn't. That afternoon, he came back from the store with 2 giant cylinders of iodized salt and a bundle of dried sage that looked like a dead animal. He looked energized, hopeful. I followed him like a ghost in my own home as he began his work. He read the instructions from a website on his phone while I held the smoking sage stick. We moved from room to room, the thick, acrid smoke stinging my eyes and catching in my throat. It didn't smell holy. It smelled like a house fire. He mumbled words from the screen, half prayer, half technical manual. I felt like a fool. We were 2 adults, wounded and terrified, playing make-believe with herbs and spices. Then came the salt. He walked the perimeter of every room, pouring a thick, white line along the base of the walls. A line in our bedroom, a line in the hall, a line in the living room. Little white walls to keep the monsters out. When he was done, the house looked absurd, crisscrossed with lines of cheap table salt. The air was heavy with smoke. He stood back, hands on his hips, admiring his work. "There," he said, a puff of a breath. "That should do it." I looked at the salt line protecting the base of the basement door. It looked pathetic, a child's drawing of a force field, but a tiny, stupid part of me wanted to believe him. A part of me so desperate for it to be over that it was willing to place its faith in salt. His alibi was our only hope. That night, the tension was a wire pulled tight. The salt line seemed to glow in the dim light. I think we should sleep apart," I said. The words tasted like ash. "Just for tonight, to be safe." What I meant was, "I can't sleep next to you." I saw a flicker of hurt in his eyes, but he suppressed it quickly. He had his narrative. He had to stick to it. "Okay," he said, nodding. "Good idea. Double-end tone. The ghost, it feeds on our proximity. Maybe if we're separate, its power is weaker." He sounded so sure, so logical. He went into the bedroom. He closed the door, leaving a tiny gap so he could see the salt line. I watched him go. I took a blanket and a pillow to the sofa in the living room. The room still stank of sage. Before I lay down, I went back to the kitchen. We had 2 small silver crucifixes from my grandmother, packed away in a box of keepsakes. I unwrapped them. Their edges were smooth and cool. I walked to the bedroom door and knocked softly. "Ethan?" He opened it. I held out one of the crucifixes. "Here, just hold on to it." He took it without a word, his fingers brushing mine. His skin was cold. I went back to the sofa and lay down, clutching my own crucifix so tightly the edges dug into my palm. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My eyes were fixed on the line of salt in front of the hallway. A pathetic white border. I prayed for it to work. I prayed for sleep to be just sleep. And then it came. There was no slow descent this time. No fading light. One moment I was staring at the ceiling. The next I was on the floor of that same dark room. But I was alone. The dreamscape was identical. The damp smell, the cold air, the scraping sound from beyond the walls. But Ethan wasn't there. A new kind of terror washed over me. The only thing worse than sharing this nightmare was facing it by myself. I was on my back. I couldn't move, paralyzed. The crucifix was still in my hand, a useless piece of cold metal. The scraping sound got louder. It was inside the room with me. Scrape, drag, scrape. It was the sound of something heavy being pulled across a stone floor. I squeezed my eyes shut, but there was no escaping it. The fear was a physical presence, pressing down on my chest, stealing my breath. I felt it before I saw it, a profound coldness seeping into the space right next to me. The smell of grave dirt and rotting leaves filled my nostrils. I forced my eyes open. A shape was leaning over me. It was not Ethan. It was long and thin, a silhouette cut from a deeper black than the surrounding dark. It had no face, just a suggestion of a head tilted at an unnatural angle. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't human. It was something else. It reached a hand toward me. The fingers were too long, jointed in too many places. They were like the legs of a spider. I tried to scream, but only a choked gurgle came out. I clutched the crucifix tighter, thrusting it forward like a sword. The thing stopped. Its featureless head tilted. It made a sound. A low, wet clicking from deep within its form. It wasn't afraid of the cross. It was curious. Its long fingers uncurled and wrapped around my hand. Its touch was like ice and broken glass. It was impossibly strong. Slowly, deliberately, it began to squeeze. I felt the bones in my hand grind together. The crucifix was trapped between its grip and mine. Then, with a casual, horrifying finality, it tightened its grip. Crack! The sound was sharp, explosive. It echoed in the dream world, loud as a gunshot. It wasn't the sound of my bones breaking. It was the cross. The silver cross in my hand had snapped in two. Pain, real and sharp, shot up my arm. I screamed. A real scream, one that tore a hole through the dream and dragged me back into the living room. My eyes flew open. I was on the sofa, drenched in sweat, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. My hand ached, a deep, throbbing pain. The scream was still echoing in the house. But it wasn't just my scream. From the bedroom I heard Ethan roar in terror and pain. Another scream, a mirror of my own, ripped from him at the exact same moment. I scrambled off the sofa, my legs tangled in the blanket. Ethan! The bedroom door flew open. He stumbled out, his face pale, his eyes wild with the same raw horror I felt. He was clutching his hand to his chest. We stared at each other across the smoky room, two soldiers meeting in a no-man's land. We didn't have to ask. We knew. We knew we had dreamed the same dream, alone. My hand, he gasped, his voice ragged. It broke it. Me too, I whispered. My own hand felt bruised, violated. Then my gaze fell to the floor. Lying on the hardwood floor between us was my crucifix, snapped cleanly in two. I looked toward the bedroom doorway. His lay in the same condition, two pieces of silver glinting dully against the wood. Broken. Both of them. The physical proof. The nightmare was real. It could touch things. It could break things. Hope died. It didn't just fade. It was murdered. Our pathetic ritual was a joke. Our shields were broken. Ethan let out a strangled laugh, a sound on the verge of madness. It's getting stronger. He backed away from the broken cross on the floor, as if it were a snake. His wild eyes darted around the room, searching for the next attack. And then he saw it. He stopped. He froze. His gaze was fixed on the floor, on the thick line of salt we had poured along the wall of the living room. Sarah, he said, his voice a dead monotone. He didn't point. He didn't have to. I followed his gaze. My blood turned to ice. The salt wasn't in a line anymore. Over a space of about 10 feet, the tiny white crystals had been rearranged. They now formed a word. The letters were neat, precise, as if written by a careful hand. It wasn't a random mess. It was a message. A reply to our ritual, a verdict on our hope. One word, spelled out in pristine white salt on the dark wood floor. Useless. The word hung in the air between us. Useless. Spelled out in our pathetic, blessed salt. It was a judgment. A punchline to a joke we didn't know we were telling. Ethan's laugh cracked and died. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. It was heavy. It was full. It was the sound of the bottom falling out of the world. We didn't clean it up. We couldn't. It felt like disturbing evidence at a crime scene. We just stared at the broken crucifixes, at the neat, mocking letters on the floor, 2 pieces of silver, 1 word of salt, the entire story of our failure. Finally, Ethan moved. His movements were stiff, robotic. "The bedroom," he said. His voice was a rasp. We have to try again. Together, not apart." I looked at him. The hope he'd clung to all afternoon was gone, replaced by a raw animal determination. He wasn't trying to fix the house anymore. He was just trying to survive the night. "No," I said. The word was small, but it was hard. A stone in my mouth. Not together. Not in there. I couldn't say why. I couldn't form the thought. The last time we were together, I saw your face on the thing that attacked me. I just knew I couldn't lie down next to him. Not now. "Then what, Sarah?" he snapped, the fear turning into anger. "We sleep on the damn sofa again? Let it pick us off one by one?" "We take shifts," I said, the idea forming as I spoke it. "One sleeps. One watches. No matter what." He looked from my face to the cursed word on the floor, then back. The fight went out of him. He sagged. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay. A watch." He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling. "I'll go first. I need to. After this." He gestured vaguely at the mess, the failed ritual, his shattered alibi. He was drowning in guilt. I could see it. So we made a new plan. A soldier's plan. The bedroom was the designated safe zone. The living room was a lost cause. I went to the bedroom, leaving him in the kitchen. I didn't close the door all the way. I left a crack. I heard the scrape of a mug, the clink of a spoon, the gurgle of the coffee maker. Normal sounds that felt obscene in the crushing quiet of the house. I climbed into bed. The sheets were cold. I didn't take off my clothes. I lay on my side, facing the door, my body coiled like a spring. The room was dark, but my eyes adjusted. I could see the tall dresser, the closet door, the vague outline of a chair in the corner. Ethan appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, a steaming mug in his hand. He didn't look at me. He looked at the room, scanning it like it was enemy territory. He pulled the chair from the corner and set it directly in front of the door, facing me, facing the bed. He sat down. A sentinel. A guard. "I won't close my eyes," he promised the darkness. I didn't answer. I just watched him. His silhouette was a solid block of black against the slightly less black hallway behind him. I could hear him sipping his coffee. Loud, deliberate sips. The sound echoed in the room. Every few minutes he would shift in the chair, the wood creaking softly. The sounds were supposed to be reassuring, a reminder that I wasn't alone, that he was there, on guard. But I couldn't sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind was a live wire. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the leaves outside, was a prelude to an attack. I watched Ethan. I watched him raise the mug to his lips. I watched him set it on the floor beside his chair. I watched the slight rise and fall of his shoulders as he breathed. Time stretched. It became a thick, slow-moving substance. An hour must have passed. Maybe more. The sips of coffee became less frequent. His posture slumped. Just a little. I saw his head dip forward once. A quick, sharp nod. He caught himself instantly, jerking upright with a soft grunt. He shook his head, a fighter trying to clear his vision. He picked up the mug, drained the last of it, but the enemy was already inside his perimeter. Exhaustion, a foe more patient than any monster. I kept my eyes open. I saw it happen again. His head drooped. This time it stayed down for a full second. 2. Then it snapped back up. He rubbed his face vigorously with both hands. I should have said something. "Ethan, My turn. But I didn't. A cold part of me wanted to see if he could do it, if his will was strong enough. Then it happened. His head went down, slowly, gently. His breathing deepened, his shoulders relaxed. He didn't jerk back up. He had crossed a line. Just for a moment. A blink in the long, dark night. A single frame cut from the film. A sound. A soft rustle, like fabric brushing against fabric. It came from right beside the bed. My heart stopped. I didn't move. My eyes were locked on Ethan. He was still in the chair, unmoving, asleep. The rustle came again. Closer. I squeezed my eyes shut. It's nothing. The house is settling. It's the wind. Then I felt it. A weight. A pressure on the mattress. Right behind me. The tiny, unmistakable dip of the bed, as if someone had just kneeled on it. Cold terror, pure and absolute, flooded my veins. He was on watch. He was right there. But it didn't matter. It was in the room. It was on the bed. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, a block of ice with a frantic, screaming mind trapped inside. The pressure on my chest started, a familiar, crushing weight. It wasn't like a hand. It was like the air itself was turning solid, squeezing the life out of me. My lungs burned, desperate for air they couldn't get. My vision started to swim, the dark shapes of the room blurring at the edges. I fought to turn my head, to look at my protector, my guard. Through the dim, watery haze of my oxygen-starved brain, I could see his shape in the chair. He was there. He was just sitting there. Watching. Is he watching? Is he watching this happen? Through the dim oxygen sinusogeluid, the thought was a shard of glass in my mind. The pressure intensified. I was going to black out. My body was giving up. I was dying. In my own bed, 10 feet away from my husband who had promised to keep me safe. Then something changed. Not in the room, in my head. A new image bloomed behind my eyes, superimposed over the dark bedroom. It was a dream, or a vision, a flash. I saw the room from above. I saw myself, lying on the bed, thrashing uselessly. And I saw a figure standing over me. It was tall. It was Ethan. His face was blank. His eyes were empty. His hands were raised, and in them he held a pillow. He was pushing down. Down. Harder. The vision was so real, so vivid, I could feel the rough texture of the pillowcase against my face, smell the stale scent of fabric. I was being suffocated. By him, with a final, convulsive surge of adrenaline, my body broke free. I exploded upwards, a single, ragged, desperate gasp for air tearing through my lungs. It was a sound like a drowning person breaking the surface. I sat bolt upright, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The room was as it was. The pressure was gone. I could breathe. I looked at the chair. Ethan was there. He wasn't asleep. He was wide awake. His eyes were huge, fixed on me. They were filled not with concern, but with a mirror of my own stark terror. He was pale. He was shaking. "Sarah," he choked out, his voice a strangled whisper. I didn't let him finish. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and fast. The vision was seared into my brain. The feeling of the pillow. His blank face. "You," I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "I dreamed. I saw you. You were the pillow. You were trying to kill me." The accusation hung between us, ugly and undeniable. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked like I had just stabbed him. "No," he finally managed to say, shaking his head frantically. "Sarah, no, I dozed off. Just for a second. I swear." He stood up, taking a half step toward me, his hands held out as if to prove they were empty. "I had a dream," he said, his voice cracking. I was standing over you. I had the pillow. I was pushing down. I woke up, and you were choking." The air left the room. His words didn't absolve him. They condemned him. They were the other half of the nightmare. The confirmation. We hadn't just had a dream. We had participated in one. He was the attacker in his dream. I was the victim in mine. And in the real world, I had almost suffocated. I recoiled from him, scrambling backward on the bed until my back hit the cold wall. I stared at him, at this man I had married, and I felt nothing. No love, no sympathy, just a vast, cold ocean of fear. He could see it in my eyes. The truth. The new truth. It didn't matter what he said. It didn't matter if he was asleep or awake. The logic was simple. The logic was brutal. He was on watch. I was attacked. One of those things was a lie. Or worse, both were true. He stopped, his hands falling to his sides. He understood. There was nothing he could say, no way to explain the unexplainable. From my side of the bed, the facts were clear. He was a sentinel who had let the enemy through the gates. Or he was the enemy. The trust wasn't just broken. It had been meticulously, expertly murdered. It was another casualty in this house, another ghost to haunt these rooms. I looked at my husband, my protector, the man who sat in a chair all night with a mug of coffee to keep me safe. And for the first time, I couldn't see him. All I could see was the man with the pillow, his eyes empty, his hands strong. All I could feel was the crushing weight on my chest. The last thought that went through my mind before the silence consumed us completely was the scar left by his promise. He said he would watch me. And he did. The silence after the nightmare was worse than the nightmare itself. It was a physical thing, a thick blanket smothering the air in the room. We sat there, two strangers on opposite sides of a bed that had become a crime scene. A war zone. I was pressed against the headboard, the cold wood a weak comfort against my spine. He stood by the chair, a ghost in the dim morning light filtering through the window. The promise he had made, I won't close my eyes, was now a piece of sharp, broken glass between us. He did watch. He watched me get attacked in his dream, and my body paid the price in the real world. That was the fact. That was the only thing that mattered. He eventually sank back into the chair, his face in his hands. I didn't move. I watched the sun creep higher, painting long, dusty fingers of light across the floorboards. Each mote of dust dancing in the light seemed to mock me. Life going on. The world turning. While mine had stopped. The sound of the shower started. A hiss of water against tile from the adjoining bathroom. The sound sliced through the quiet. It was him. Moving. Trying to wash it all away. Trying to pretend. This was it. My chance. The thought was not a plan. It was an instinct. A gunshot in my brain. Get out. I slid off the bed. My feet made no sound on the old wood floor. My muscles were screaming. My throat was raw, but my body moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. Survival. I grabbed the duffel bag from the bottom of the closet. The one we used for weekend trips? The idea was a bitter joke. I didn't pack. I threw things. A pair of jeans from the floor, a tangle of t-shirts from a drawer. I zipped open the side pocket of my purse, my fingers fumbling. Wallet. Good. Keys. They were there, the cold metal a promise of escape. My movements were quiet, frantic. Every rustle of fabric, every soft thud of a shoe hitting the bottom of the bag, sounded like an explosion in my ears. I kept my eyes locked on the bathroom door. Steam was starting to curl out from under it. It was still in there. Safe. I slung the bag over my shoulder. It was heavy. An anchor. I took one last look around the room. Our room. The rumpled sheets. The chair standing guard in front of nothing. The dream was still here. I could feel it clinging to the air, to the curtains, a toxic residue. I crept out of the bedroom, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I didn't breathe. Down the hallway, past the living room where he'd tried to perform his pathetic salt and silver ritual. The word was still there on the floor. Useless. A final insult. The front door. Freedom. I didn't let myself feel relief. Not yet. I eased the door open, wincing at the tiny groan of the hinges. I slipped through the gap and pulled it shut behind me. The click of the latch settling into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The morning air was cold. It hit my face, sharp and real. It smelled like damp earth and pine needles. It smelled like life. I ran. Not a sprint, but a fast, stumbling walk down the gravel path to the driveway. My old sedan was sitting there, covered in a thin film of dew. My escape pod. My salvation. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the car door open. I threw the bag onto the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. The seat was cold. I slammed the door shut. The sound echoed in the quiet suburban morning. Key in the ignition. I turned it. Click. My stomach dropped. No. I twisted it again. Harder this time. Click, 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 click. A weak, pathetic chattering noise. The dashboard lights flickered once, then died. Nothing. The battery was dead. Of course. Of all the goddamn days for the battery to be dead. A wave of furious despair crashed over me. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel. The horn didn't even make a sound. Shit! The word was a hot whisper in the cold car. Okay. Think. I couldn't stay here. I had to call a cab. An Uber. Anything. My phone. My phone was on the kitchen counter. I'd seen it when I ran past. Left it right next to the goddamn fruit bowl. A rookie mistake. An idiot's mistake. I took a deep breath. I had to go back in. Just for a second. Grab the phone and get out. He was still in the shower. He wouldn't even know I was gone. I got out of the car, leaving the door open. I walked back toward the house, my feet crunching on the gravel. This time there was no hope in my steps. Just a dull, heavy dread. I reached the front door. I wrapped my hand around the cold brass knob and turned. It didn't move. I tried again, pushing my shoulder against the door. Nothing. It was locked. I stared at the knob, but I didn't lock it. I just pulled it shut. The latch clicked, but I didn't throw the deadbolt. I never throw the deadbolt from the outside without a key. He locked it. The thought hit me like a physical blow. He heard me. He heard the car. He got out of the shower and he locked the door. He locked me out. Ethan! I yelled, my voice cracking. I banged on the door with my fist. Ethan, open the door! It's me. Silence. I banged harder. The sound echoing unnaturally in the morning quiet. Ethan! Nothing. Just the sound of my own frantic breathing. Then a sound from inside the house. A single, sharp TH whump. I froze. Another TH whump from a different window. And another. And another. A rapid, synchronized succession of sounds. Twump, twump, twump. I watched in horror as every single window blind in the house, on the ground floor and the second floor, snapped down in unison. One moment, I could see the vague shapes of furniture inside. The next, there was only a uniform, blank, beige wall. A fortress. The house had sealed itself. It had closed its eyes. Cold terror, clean and sharp, pierced through my anger. This wasn't Ethan. He was one man. He couldn't be in every room at once, pulling every cord at the exact same second. What was in there with him? My mind went blank. I stumbled back from the door, my eyes wide, scanning the blank face of the house. It was watching me. I was locked out of my own home, and something inside was watching me. I ran to the living room window, cupping my hands around my eyes, peering through the tiny gap at the edge of the blind. I saw nothing, just darkness. I ran to the back of the house. The sliding glass door to the kitchen, locked. The small window above the sink, locked. Every entry point was sealed. I was a prisoner on my own front lawn. I was backing away, my heart hammering, my mind screaming, when I heard a new sound. A click. The sound of a deadbolt turning. I spun around. The front door was opening. Slowly, it swung inward. Ethan stood there. A towel was wrapped around his waist. His hair was wet and dripping onto his shoulders. He was holding my phone in his hand. He looked confused, genuinely, utterly confused. "Sarah," he said. His voice was laced with sleep and concern. "What's wrong? I heard banging." He held up my phone. "You left this. I was going to bring it out to you." I stared at him, at his open, worried face, at his bare chest, with the faint red marks from the night before still visible. I looked past him, into the dark hallway. Everything was quiet. "The door," I stammered, my voice a dry rasp. "It was locked. The blinds." He frowned, looking back over his shoulder. "The blinds? What about them?" He looked back at me, his brow furrowed. "Honey, you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you okay?" He stepped aside to let me in. His innocence was perfect. It was flawless, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. I couldn't read him. I couldn't tell if he was the world's best actor, or if he was just as clueless as he seemed. Was he the monster, or was he another puppet? I walked past him, my body rigid. I felt like I was entering a cage. The air inside was thick and still. My eyes darted around the living room. The blinds were all down, just as I'd seen. A neat row of beige sentinels guarding the house from the outside world, or guarding me from leaving. He closed the door behind me. The soft click of the latch sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. I was just getting some air, I lied. The words tasted like ash. You took your bag just to get some air? He asked. His tone wasn't accusatory. It was just hurt. He pointed with his chin toward the duffel bag still clutched in my hand. I had no answer for that. I walked into the kitchen, putting the bag on the floor. I needed a moment. I needed to think. My phone. He brought it out to me. That was a normal, husbandly thing to do. Maybe the dead battery, the locked door, the blinds. Maybe it was all a string of horrible coincidences. Maybe I was losing my mind. I took the phone from his hand. His fingers were cold. Thanks, I mumbled, not looking at him. I glanced down at the screen. It was lit up. A new notification was on the lock screen. A text message. It was from _Ethan. It was received 1 minute ago. My blood turned to ice. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there, in the kitchen, my husband standing less than 2 feet away from me, his own phone still tucked in the pocket of his bathrobe, hanging on the hook by the door, and I read the message his phone had somehow sent to mine while it was in his hand. One sentence. Where do you think you're going? My thumb hovered over the screen. Over the message. He was standing right there. His hair was damp. Water droplets ran down his neck and onto his shoulders. His face was a mask of bland concern, a perfect performance. Or perfect innocence. I couldn't tell. I couldn't know. That was the point. That was the whole fucking point. What is it? He asked, his voice soft. He took a half step closer. I flinched. A tiny, involuntary jerk of my shoulders. His eyes registered it. The concern in them flickered, replaced by a flash of hurt. Nothing, I said. The word was a puff of air. I shoved the phone into the pocket of my jeans. Just a spam text. It was a weak lie. A stupid lie. But my brain wasn't working. It was a hunk of dead meat in my skull, flooded with ice water. The message burned in my pocket. Where do you think you're going? It wasn't his voice. It wasn't his words, but it came from his phone. What other explanation was there? There was none. Not one that let me sleep at night. He didn't press. He just nodded, his gaze dropping to the duffel bag at my feet. The question was still there, hanging in the air between us. You took your bag just to get some air? I had no answer. I kicked the bag under the kitchen table. Out of sight, not out of mind. We didn't speak. The silence that followed was a living thing. It filled the kitchen. It pressed in from the hallway. It seeped out from under the closed blinds. We moved to the living room. It was a slow, formal procession, like 2 prisoners being led to their cells. He sat in the armchair. I sat on the far end of the sofa, as far away from him as I could get. I pulled my knees to my chest. I watched the dust motes dance in the slivers of light that peeked around the edges of the blinds. The house was a tomb. We were the fresh corpses. Time stopped working right. Minutes stretched into hours. The slivers of light on the floor crept sideways, then faded. Day turned to dusk. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. We didn't turn on a light. We just sat in the growing dark. Hunger was a distant, dull ache. Thirst was a layer of sandpaper in my throat. But the need to stay awake, the need to watch him, was stronger. Every time his head nodded, my heart jumped. Every time my eyelids felt heavy, a jolt of pure panic shot through my veins. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My ears strained, searching for a sound. A creak, a footstep, anything. There was nothing, just the sound of his breathing across the room. And my own. We were a 2-person orchestra of fear. Sleep. It wasn't a choice. It was a tide. It pulled at me. My head grew heavy, a lead weight on my neck. I saw his head slump forward, his body finally giving in. A part of me screamed, "Wake up! Stay on guard!" But another deeper part of me just let go. The fight was gone. The exhaustion was absolute. My eyes drifted shut. The darkness behind my eyelids was a relief. For 1 second, and then I was there again. The hallway. It was always the hallway. Long, narrow, and wrong. The wallpaper with its faded floral pattern seemed to crawl in my peripheral vision. There was no light source, but I could see. A gray, murky vision, like looking through dirty water. Ethan was there. Not the real Ethan sitting in the armchair, but a version of him. He was standing at the far end of the hall, near the door to our bedroom. He was just a shape. A silhouette. I couldn't move. My feet were nailed to the floor. I tried to scream, but my throat was sealed. This was the routine. This was the script. The shadow would approach. It would attack. I would wake up with new pain. I braced myself. But it didn't move. Instead, it spoke. And the voice that came out of the dark shape of my husband was my own. It was my voice, but twisted. My pitch, my cadence, but laced with a cold, metallic cruelty I didn't recognize. It echoed in the narrow space, directed not at me, but at the dream version of Ethan. "You think I don't know?" My voice sneered at him from the end of the hall. "You think I don't see you sitting at that desk pretending you're not drowning? Everyone at that firm knows you're a fraud, Ethan, a diversity hire, a placeholder until they find someone with a real spine." The silhouette of Ethan flinched. It was a small movement, but I felt it like a physical blow. The words were poisoned darts, and they found their mark. It was his deepest fear, his most private insecurity. He'd never said it out loud, not in those exact words, but I'd seen it in his eyes after a long day. I'd felt it in the tension of his shoulders when he talked about his boss. This thing knew. It had reached into his head and pulled out the ugliest thought it could find, and it was using my voice to say it. "That promotion is never coming," my voice continued, dripping with contempt. "They laugh at you. They laugh at your ideas. And me? I have to come home every night and pretend to respect a man who can't even command respect in his own office. I'm tired of carrying you." I was screaming inside my own head, "No! Stop! That's not me!" But the paralysis held me fast. I could only watch as the thing wearing my voice tore my husband apart. The shape of him seemed to shrink, to curve in on itself under the weight of the assault. Then it turned its attention to me. The hallway shifted. Suddenly, the silhouette of Ethan was gone, and I was looking at myself, a mirror image of my paralyzed form, standing where he had been. And from that shape, a new voice came. Ethan's voice. Not his real voice. Not the warm, gentle tone I knew. This was a hollow, dead thing. The voice of a judge delivering a sentence. And it spoke only to me. "We need to talk about our little secret, Sarah," it said. The air grew cold. Colder than before. An impossible, grave, deep cold. "Not my secret. Yours. The one from before me. The one from Boston." A white-hot spike of terror lanced through me. No, it couldn't. It couldn't know that. I had never told a soul. Not my mother, not my best friend, not him, never him. It was a memory buried under a decade of concrete. "You remember, don't you?" Ethan's cold voice whispered down the hall. It sounded closer now, right in my ear. "The clinic. The rain on the window. The choice you made so you could have a clean start." The images flooded my mind, vivid and unwanted. The sterile smell. The kind-faced nurse who wouldn't meet my eyes. The empty, aching feeling afterward. A ghost of a life I had erased. A part of my history that belonged only to me. "Did it have his eyes?" the voice hissed. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a physical force, knocking the air from my dream lungs. Did you even think about it for a second? Or were you just so eager to run away? To find someone new? Someone safe? Someone stupid enough not to ask about the parts of you that were already broken? This was it. The true violation. The physical wounds were one thing. They were skin and bone. This was a scalpel carving up my soul. It was taking the most painful, private piece of my past and turning it into a weapon. A weapon to use against him. A weapon to use against me. It wasn't just trying to hurt us, it was trying to destroy the very idea of us. It was showing us that there was no safe place. Not even in our own minds, not even in our own history. It owned all of it. I woke up with a gasp. It wasn't a slow return to consciousness. It was a violent ejection. One moment I was in the corpse-cold hallway of the dream. The next my eyes were wide open, staring into the dim gray of the living room. My cheek was stinging. I put a hand to my face and my fingers came away wet. A thin line of blood trickled from a fresh scratch. A perfect, straight line from my temple to my jaw. I glanced across the room. Ethan was stirring in his chair. A dark, ugly bruise was blooming on his forearm, the one that had been pristine when he fell asleep. The physical price had been paid. The toll had been collected. But that didn't matter. The physical pain was nothing. A dull background noise. The real wound was the one I couldn't see. The one that was now wide open, bleeding in the silent space between us. Ethan sat up straight. He didn't look at his arm. He didn't rub the sleep from his eyes. His gaze found mine across the dark room. His face was empty. A blank sheet of paper. All the confusion, the hurt, the concern from yesterday was gone. There was nothing left. Just a deep, chilling stillness. He stared at me for a full 10 seconds. The silence pressed down, heavier than gravity. Then he spoke. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion at all. It was the scariest sound I had ever heard. Is it true? One question. 3 words. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a plea for an explanation. It was a simple request for data. For the confirmation of the horror that thing had just shown him in his sleep. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The air wouldn't move. My lungs wouldn't work. What could I say? How could I explain a truth that had been stolen from my mind and delivered to his as an act of pure terror? To deny it would be a lie. To admit would be to confirm that the monster in his head had told him the truth. Both paths led to ruin. He didn't need an answer. My silence was enough. It was a confession, loud and clear. I saw something in his eyes break. A tiny, final snap. The last thread of trust. The last echo of the man I married. Gone. I couldn't stop it. A sob tore its way out of my throat. It was a raw, ugly sound. It wasn't a cry for comfort. It was the sound of defeat. The sound of something being irrevocably shattered. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I wrapped my arms around myself, but there was no warmth. He just watched me. His face was a stone mask. He didn't move toward me. He didn't look away. He just watched me break. The entity didn't have to tear us limb from limb. It didn't have to drag us into whatever hell it came from. It had found a more effective way. It had turned our own hearts, our own secrets, into its weapons. It had forced us to look at each other and see, not a partner, not a lover, but a stranger. A collection of secrets and lies. The physical wounds on our skin would scab over. They would fade into scars. This wound would not. This was the one that would kill us. The question was a ghost. It hung in the air of the house for days. It followed me from the living room to the kitchen. It sat with me on the toilet. It watched me from Ethan's side of the bed, a space I no longer occupied. I slept on the sofa, or I tried to. Time was broken. It didn't flow, it stuttered. It came in jagged pieces of gray light and deep shadow. We didn't speak. Words were pointless. The silence did all the talking. We moved around each other like ghosts in our own home. He'd make coffee. I'd wait until he left the kitchen to pour a cup. I'd find a plate with a sandwich on the counter. His. I'd throw it away and eat crackers out of the box, standing over the sink. He was a presence. A shape in my peripheral vision. I was the same to him. We were roommates in a morgue. The nights were the price. Every time my eyes closed, the hallway was there. The attacks continued. But they were different now. The entity knew it had already won the war for our trust. It didn't need to whisper secrets anymore. Now it was just punishment. Brutality for its own sake. I'd wake up with a sharp pain in my ribs, a new bruise mottling the skin. He would limp in the morning, his ankle swollen. We tended to our wounds alone. We were two soldiers in separate trenches, fighting the same invisible enemy. The bathroom cabinet was a shrine of gauze, medical tape, and antiseptic wipes. Our bodies were a canvas of pain. 5 days after the question, or 6, it didn't matter. The sun was a weak, watery thing outside the grimy window. I was in the bathroom, the door locked. I peeled the bandage off a cut on my shin. It was deep, a long, clean slice, as if from a razor. The dream memory was a flash of something sharp and metallic, a pendulum swinging in the dark. The skin around the wound was red and angry. Normal. But my eyes caught on something else. Right next to the new cut was an old one, a scar from 2 weeks ago, one of the first deep ones. It should have been a faint pink line by now. It wasn't. I leaned closer to the sink. The light from the single bulb above the mirror was harsh. The scar was not pink. It was not white. It was gray. A flat, dead gray, the color of wet cement. I reached down, my finger tracing the line. The skin was hard. Not a scab. Different. It had a texture. I ran my fingertip over it again. There were tiny ridges. A pattern, like the grain on a piece of wood. Like bark. A cold feeling started in my gut, deeper than fear. It was a chemical cold, a sense of wrongness that went past the mind and into the blood. I pulled up my sleeve, a cluster of faint, crisscrossing scratches on my forearm. The ones I'd dismissed as my own nails in the night. They weren't faint anymore. They were thin, gray lines etched into my skin. The same bark-like texture. I twisted my arm, watching the light play over them. They didn't look like scars. They looked like something growing. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking. I threw the door open. Ethan was in the living room, sitting in the armchair, staring at the blank TV screen. He didn't look up when I came in. "Let me see your arm," I said. My voice was a croak. I hadn't used it in days. He didn't move. He just kept staring. "Ethan, your arm, the bruise." Slowly, like an old man, he turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were empty. "Pits." He held out his arm. The dark purple of the bruise had faded, but in its place, the skin was a mottled gray. I grabbed his arm. My touch felt like a violation. His skin was cold. I ran my thumb over the mark. It felt like his skin was turning to stone, hard, ridged. Panic seized my throat. I let go of him and scrambled back to the bathroom, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at my reflection. My eyes were wide, the pupils huge. The scratch on my cheek, the one from that night. I had hidden it with makeup, hoping it would fade. I scrubbed at my face with a wet washcloth, raw and desperate. The makeup came off. The scratch was still there, a thin, perfect line. And it was gray. I stared. I stared until my reflection blurred. We were marked. Both of us. The entity wasn't just hurting us. It wasn't just breaking our minds. It was changing us. It was overwriting our skin, cell by cell. It was turning us into something else. The wounds were not wounds. They were seeds. And they were starting to sprout. I slid down the wall, my back hitting the cool tile. I wrapped my arms around my knees. What were we becoming? What was the end game? This was a process. A transformation. A slow, creeping invasion that started in the dream and was now colonizing our flesh. There was no escape. How do you run from your own body? Hours passed. The sun set. The house sank into its familiar darkness. I didn't move from the bathroom floor. He didn't move from the armchair. We were statues in a dying museum. Eventually the exhaustion came for me. It always did. I didn't fight it. My eyes drifted shut. I found him in the living room. He was standing by the window, looking out into a night that wasn't there. He was examining his hand. A long scar ran across his knuckles from a night I could barely remember. I watched him. He slowly flexed his fingers, making a fist, then uncurling it. The movement was fluid, too fluid. He turned his hand over, his eyes fixed on the gray, woody texture of the scar tissue. He looked up. His eyes met mine across the room. The fear was gone. All of it. The hurt, the confusion, the betrayal. It had all been burned away. In its place was something I had never seen in him before. A deep, chilling curiosity. His gaze was not that of a victim. It was the gaze of a scientist observing a strange and fascinating specimen. The specimen was himself. He looked at his own transformed hand, then at me, and a flicker of something passed through his eyes. An understanding. A question. "Do you feel it too?" He felt the change. He felt the strength in the new flesh. The wrongness was becoming a new kind of rightness. And that look, that cold, analytical acceptance, was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. The man I married was gone. The monster that thing broke was gone too. This was the third stage. This was what came after. The dream shifted. The hallway. Of course. It was always the hallway. The crawling floral wallpaper. The floor sticky under my bare feet. But something was different. My feet weren't nailed to the floor. The paralysis was gone. I could move. I could run. I didn't. Ethan was there, standing beside me. Not a dream version. It felt like him. The real him. He was looking down the hall, his posture calm. He wasn't afraid. Neither was I. The terror that usually flooded my veins was absent. There was only a strange, humming anticipation. It came from the darkness at the end of the hall. The shape. The familiar silhouette of pure dread. It moved toward us. Not with a rush, but with a slow, deliberate glide. In every other dream, this was the moment we would break. We would scream or try to run or cower. This time, we stood our ground. We watched it come. It stopped a few feet in front of us. The air grew cold, but it wasn't the grave cold from before. It was just cool. The thing raised a hand. A long, thin appendage made of shadow and bone. It didn't reach for my throat. It didn't form a claw. It extended a single, sharp finger. Slowly, gently, it reached out and touched the gray scar on my cheek. I braced for pain. A searing burn. A razor slice. Nothing. There was only a sensation. A low, thrumming vibration that traveled from its fingertip, through the scar, and down into the root of my teeth. It was a current of information. A jolt of recognition. It wasn't a feeling of violation. It wasn't an attack. It felt like a key turning in a lock. It felt like coming home. It felt right. The dream's after-image did not fade with the morning light. It clung to the air. The terror was gone. The raw, animal fear that had owned us for weeks was simply absent. In its place was a quiet hum, a stillness that was not peace. It was observation. Ethan was already up. He stood in the kitchen, not making coffee, not doing anything. Just standing. I walked past him to the sink. He didn't flinch. I didn't flinch. We were two objects in the same room. His head turned. He wasn't looking at my face. He was looking at the thin gray line on my cheek. His eyes weren't filled with pity or fear. They were clinical. Curious. He felt it, too. The change. The wrongness settling into our bones as a new kind of normal. He turned from me without a word. He walked to the hall closet, pulled out the folding stepladder. His movements were deliberate, unhurried. He carried it to the center of the upstairs hallway, directly under the square outline of the attic hatch. He unfolded it. The click of the metal legs locking into place was loud in the still house. "What are you doing?" My voice was flat. "Looking," he said. He didn't look at me. He looked up at the hatch. He climbed. His feet were sure on the rungs. He pushed the hatch. It lifted with a shower of dust and insulation that caught in the weak sunlight from the hall window. He pulled the chain for the light. A single bare bulb cast a dirty yellow glow. He hoisted himself up and disappeared into the opening. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening. I heard the creak of floorboards above me, a sound I'd never heard before. He was walking around, the sound of something heavy being dragged, a wooden scrape. Then another. He was searching. He wasn't looking for a way out. He was looking for the source. He had accepted the premise. He was moving on to the research phase. The thought sent a new kind of cold through me, a cold that had nothing to do with ghosts. I waited for 5 minutes, 10. The only sound was the house settling and the faint, rhythmic scrape from above. I should have been terrified. I should have run out the front door. But I didn't. That strange calm, that residue from the dream, held me in place. I was a spectator now. We both were. He reappeared at the edge of the opening. His face was streaked with dirt. He backed down the ladder, holding a wooden box. It was plain. No carvings, just a dark, stained wood box about the size of a shoebox, with a simple brass latch. He set it down on the floor, went back up to turn off the light, and closed the hatch. He folded the ladder and put it away. Every action was precise, methodical. He carried the box into the living room and set it on the coffee table between us. He looked at me, then at the box. He lifted the latch. It made a small, dry click. Inside were photographs. Not a neat album. A chaotic pile. Dozens of them. Black and white prints with deckled edges. Faded color photos from the 70s, their whites yellowed to cream. Glossy prints from the 90s. He started taking them out, laying them on the table in a growing mosaic of smiling faces. They were all couples. A soldier in uniform with his arm around a girl in a poodle skirt, standing in front of this house. A hippie couple with long hair, sitting on the porch steps. A man with a thick mustache and a woman in a power suit, a moving truck visible behind them. On and on. Different decades. Different people. All united by this address. I stared. My brain struggled to connect the dots. This wasn't a crime scene. This was a history. A legacy. They all look so happy, I whispered. The words felt strange in my mouth. Look closer, Ethan said. His voice was low. He picked up one of the black and white photos, the soldier and the girl. He pointed. The woman's dress had a high collar, but just above the fabric, on the side of her neck, was a small, dark mark. A smudge. A bruise. He picked up another. The hippie couple. The man was shirtless, but the woman wore a long-sleeved peasant blouse. Even though the sun in the photo was bright, her hands were tucked into her bell-bottoms. Hiding them? He laid them down. Another. A family photo from the 80s. A couple with a young son. The man was smiling, but he wore a turtleneck. In summer, my eyes scanned the growing collection. A woman with a beautiful smile, but her left arm was held stiffly at her side, the sleeve of her cardigan pulled down over her wrist. A man laughing, his head thrown back, revealing a pale, linear scar just below his jawline, almost lost in the shadow. Scratches. Bruises. Marks. All there. All partially hidden. The same injuries. Our injuries. They were trying to cover them, just like I had tried to cover the scratch on my cheek with makeup. It was a club. A secret society of victims, their initiation fee paid in blood and skin. The house wasn't haunted by one tragedy. It was a factory for them. It took people in and broke them in a specific, repeatable way. The air in the room grew thick. The faces in the photos seemed to watch us. They weren't strangers. They were us, 20 years ago. 40. 60. We were just the latest print in the collection. My gaze drifted from the table. My eyes felt pulled toward the built-in bookshelf next to the fireplace. It was full of old paperbacks left by previous owners. Most were junk. But one book stood out. It wasn't a paperback. It was a small, leather-bound journal. It was just there. I don't know why I had never noticed it before. Or maybe I had, and my mind had refused to see it. While Ethan was lost in the photos, organizing them by decade, a historian of our own doom, I walked to the bookshelf. My hand reached out. My fingers touched the worn leather. I pulled it free. There was no name on the cover. I opened it. The handwriting was a woman's. Loopy. Desperate. Day 4. Woke up with a new one. A deep scratch on my shoulder. He says he didn't hear anything. He says I must have done it to myself. I don't believe him. Not anymore. I flipped a few pages. Day 12. The dreams are the same every night. The hallway. The shadow. It holds me down. He says he has them too. But in the morning, his cuts are never as bad as mine. Why? Why does it want me more? My heart was hammering. I could hear the blood in my ears. This was the woman from before us. The one whose mail we still got sometimes. Her name was Chloe. I kept flipping, the pages a frantic blur of fear and paranoia. She wrote about locking herself in the bathroom, about trying to stay awake, about accusing him. and him accusing her. It was our story, written in another woman's hand. Ethan was still focused on the pictures. He had found a Polaroid, newer than the rest. The colors were still vibrant. A man and a woman, standing in our kitchen. Chloe and her husband. They were smiling for the camera, but the smiles were tight. Forced. The man, Mark, was wearing a t-shirt. On the side of his neck, 3 long, red lines stood out against his skin. Fresh scratches. At that exact moment, my thumb found the last written page in the diary. The handwriting was different. Jagged. Scrawled. The pen had dug deep into the paper. It was just one sentence. My breath hitched. A sound escaped my throat. A raw, ragged gasp that was almost a scream. Ethan's head shot up. He saw the journal in my hands, my face pale. "What is it?" he asked. I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the page. He crossed the room in 2 strides and looked down. He read the words. "It's not the house, it's him." The words hung between us. A death sentence. His eyes darted from the journal to my face, a new, wild fear igniting in them. A fear for himself. He backed away from me. "Him," he breathed. "It was Mark." "She means it was Mark." But his voice lacked conviction. His eyes were wide. He scrambled back to the coffee table, back to the photographs. His hand shook as he fumbled through them again. He wasn't just looking at the wounds anymore. He was looking at the faces, the eyes. He stopped. He held up the Polaroid of Chloe and Mark. Then he held up the photo from the 70s. The hippie couple. Then the one from the 50s. The soldier and his girl. He laid them side by side. "No," he whispered. "Oh, God, no." I stumbled over to him. What is it?" "Look," he said, his finger tapping the photos one by one. "Look at them. In every single picture, one of them is worse." He was right. Chloe's journal was full of her own injuries, but in the photo, Mark had the fresh marks. In the hippie photo, the woman in the long sleeves looked pale and thin, but the man beside her had a network of faint white scars on his chest. In the photo of the soldier, the girl had the bruise on her neck, but his eyes were haunted. Sunken. "It's not just the wounds," Ethan choked out, his voice cracking. "It's a pattern. One of them is the target. The other one. The other one." He stared at the photos. A sick understanding dawned on his face. In each picture, the one with fewer or more hidden injuries had a different look in their eye. Not happiness. Not love. A look of possession. A chilling calm. The look of a survivor. The look of a host. The house wasn't the trap. It was the nest. The entity didn't choose its victims. It was passed on. Like a disease. It latched onto a couple, fed on them, and when one broke or died, the survivor carried the seed to the next relationship. A chain of misery, stretching back through time. He looked from the photos to the diary, then to me. "It's not the house, it's him." The words echoed in my head. Chloe wasn't talking about her husband Mark. It was a warning. A final, desperate attempt to explain the rule. Ethan looked at his own hands, at the gray, bark-like skin that was hardening over his knuckles. He thought about his wounds. Then he thought about mine. The deep slice on my shin. The scratch on my cheek. The frequency. The severity. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes met mine. The analytical curiosity was gone. The fear was gone. Everything was gone, replaced by a single, soul-shattering realization. He looked at me, at Sarah, his wife. But he wasn't seeing me anymore. He was seeing the pattern. He was seeing the woman in the Polaroid with the bright, predatory eyes. He was seeing the stronger one, the survivor, the carrier. He was the victim, and I was the monster. The words were a brand. "It's not the house, It's him. Ethan's breath was loud in the room, a shuddering, wet sound. He was still several feet away, near the coffee table, a safe distance from me. From the monster. He saw me. He finally saw what I was. The realization was a chasm that had opened in the floor between us. His eyes, fixed on me, were wide with a new kind of terror. It was not the fear of a shadow in a dream. It was the fear of a man looking at a loaded gun in the hands of the person he loved. My own blood was ice in my veins. The leather-bound journal felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Chloe's frantic script. Her paranoia, her accusations. It wasn't paranoia, it was a diagnosis. She had seen the pattern in her husband Mark, the survivor, the one with fewer cuts, the one whose eyes held a secret calm, the carrier. Just like me, the thought was a physical blow. I stumbled back, my legs weak, and hit the wall. The frame of the built-in bookshelf dug into my spine. I slid down, crumpling into a heap on the floor. I held the journal to my chest like a shield against my own reflection in Ethan's eyes. He didn't move. He didn't speak. The silence stretched, pulled taut by the unspeakable thing that now lived between us. He was the victim. I was the monster. The house was just the arena. Then he moved. It was not a sudden lunge. It was not a frightened retreat toward the door. He took a single, slow step toward the coffee table. He knelt. His movements were drained of all panic, all emotion. He was the historian again, a man studying an artifact. He picked up one of the photographs, the Polaroid of Chloe and Mark. He held it up, his back mostly to me. "We're not the first," he said. His voice was flat, empty, a statement of fact. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the room, to the history soaked into the walls. He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his profile in the gloom. "We're just the next." He put the Polaroid down. Carefully, he selected another, a glossy print from the 90s. The woman with the forced smile and the long cardigan. He placed it next to the first. He picked up another, the hippie couple, then the soldier and his girl. He didn't arrange them by decade anymore. He arranged them in pairs, survivor and victim. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. I watched him, unable to look away. He was building the evidence for my prosecution. Our whole lives, this house, this dream, it had all been a lie. I wasn't his partner. I was his predator. He finally stopped. He had arranged 4 pairs of photos in a neat row. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he looked over his shoulder at me, huddled on the floor. He picked up the last photograph, the Polaroid of Mark and Chloe. He pointed with a trembling finger, not at Chloe, but at the man beside her. Mark. The man with the fresh scratches on his neck. The man whose eyes, despite the smile, were tired. So incredibly tired. "Look at him," Ethan said, his voice a low rasp. "Really look. Does he look familiar?" My mind was a storm of static and fear. I couldn't think. I just saw the picture. The grainy colors. The forced smiles. A man. Just a man. "He sold us the house, Sarah." The words cut through the noise. He sold us the house. The memory hit me. A flash of a hot afternoon in July, standing on the porch. A tall, thin man with thinning hair. Mark. He had been eager to sell. Almost desperate. He kept wiping sweat from his brow, though it wasn't that hot. His hands shook when he gave us the keys. At the time, I thought he was just emotional about leaving his home. A new start, he'd said. He needed a new start. I remembered his eyes. They weren't sad. They weren't nostalgic. I saw it now, with the clarity of a death sentence. They were relieved. Utterly, completely, and profoundly relieved. "Oh, God," I whispered. My own voice sounded alien. It came from the throat of a stranger. "Oh, my God, Ethan." He wasn't selling a house. He was passing a torch. He was shedding a skin. He was finding a replacement. He had been the carrier. The curse had lived in him, fed on him and Chloe, until she was gone. And then it had lain dormant, starving, waiting, until he found us, a happy couple, full of love and hope, a perfect meal. We didn't buy a house. We accepted a transfer. We had taken his place in the chain. The constriction started in my chest. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, unbreathable. This room wasn't my living room anymore. It was a cage. The photos weren't history. They were a warning. The journal wasn't a diary. It was a suicide note. I was the source. I was the nexus. The thing in the dark. The shadow in the dream. It wasn't just attacking us. It was connected to me. It flowed from me. When it held him down in the dream, were those my hands? When it whispered terrifying things in his ear, was that my voice? The thought made me want to vomit. I scrambled backward on the floor, trying to get away from myself. My back hit the bookshelf again. There was nowhere to go. Ethan turned fully to face me. He stood up. He left the photos on the table, a gallery of our future. He started walking toward me. Not fast, not slow, just a steady, deliberate pace. Each footstep on the hardwood floor was a hammer blow against my sanity. "No!" I whimpered, shaking my head. "Ethan, no! Stay back!" He didn't stop. My mind raced. Run. Get out. Call the police? What would I say? My wife is the host for a dream parasite that's existed for 60 years? They would lock me up. Him. Both of us. He reached the spot where I was huddled on the floor. He didn't crouch down. He stood over me, looking down. His face was a mask of shadows. The clinical curiosity was back, but it was mixed with something else now. Something I couldn't name. Something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "All this time," he said, his voice quiet, conversational. "I thought we were fighting the same thing." He let out a short, hollow laugh. It was a terrible sound. "But we weren't. You weren't fighting it at all, were you?" "That's not true," I sobbed. "Ethan, I'm scared. I'm just as scared as you." "Are you?" he asked. He knelt down, bringing his face level with mine. His eyes searched my face. "Your cuts heal faster. The shadows in the dream, they hurt me. But they talk to you. I've heard them. Whispering your name." My blood froze. He had heard that? "It's a connection," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It was mesmerizing, terrifying. It's not just attacking, it's integrating. It needs two people, a victim and a host. It feeds on the fear of one, and it lives inside the other. It needs the relationship, the bond. He reached out a hand. I flinched, expecting a blow, but his fingers were gentle. He brushed them against the thin gray line on my cheek. The scar. My scar. "We've been trying to fight it," he said, his thumb tracing the mark on my skin. "Trying to stay awake, trying to sleep apart, trying to run. And it just gets worse. Because we're fighting the rules." "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my whole body trembling under his touch. "It's a symbiosis, Sarah, a bond. It doesn't want to kill us. Not yet. It wants to feed. It wants the fear, the pain, the doubt." He looked for my scar, deep into my eyes. That new, unreadable expression was intensifying. It was a strange fire. Not rage. Not love. It was acceptance. A dark, twisted acceptance. "Maybe we've been doing it all wrong," he breathed. His voice was seductive, hypnotic. "Maybe we're not supposed to fight it. Maybe this is the point." His face was so close now I could feel his breath on my skin. "Maybe this is the only way to truly be one, the only way to truly belong to each other." His pupils were huge, black pools in the dim light. To share everything, not just the good things, not just the house and the bills, everything, the pain, the fear. He leaned closer still, his lips almost touching my ear. The change. He pulled his hand back from my face. My skin burned where he had touched it. My trembling had stopped. The cold terror was receding, replaced by a slow, creeping warmth. His words echoed in the silence of my mind. The change. He was right. We had fought. We had run. We had hidden from each other. And it only fed the thing. It thrived on our separation. It feasted on our distrust. What if we tried the opposite? What if we leaned into it? What if we surrendered? My eyes met his. The chasm between us was gone. In its place was a bridge. A dark, terrifying bridge, but a bridge nonetheless. He saw the shift in my eyes. He saw the surrender. He gave me a small, slow nod. He stood up and held out his hand. I looked at his outstretched hand, the scratches on his knuckles, the graying skin. The hand of my husband. The hand of the victim. I took it. His skin was cold. I let him pull me to my feet. We stood there for a long moment, holding hands in the center of the room, surrounded by the ghosts in the photographs. We were not Sarah and Ethan anymore. We were the host and the vessel, the new link in the chain. Without a word, he led me out of the living room and up the stairs. He didn't turn on any lights. We walked through the dark hallway, our joined hands a point of strange comfort. He opened the door to our bedroom. The bed, which we had avoided for weeks, looked like an altar. A place of sacrifice. He let go of my hand and pulled back the covers. I got in. He walked around to his side and did the same. We lay there on our backs, side by side, staring up at the dark ceiling. It was the first time we had shared this bed in what felt like a lifetime. There was no embrace, no kiss. There was no need. This was a different kind of intimacy. A terrible, absolute complicity. I was no longer afraid of the woman in the journal. I pitied her. She had fought it. She had tried to run. She had died in paranoia and fear. She didn't understand the rules. But we did now. We were learning. I turned my head on the pillow to look at Ethan. He was already looking at me. In the near total darkness, I saw the glint of his eyes. We no longer feared the sleep. We craved it. Sleep did not come. It took us. One moment, I was aware of the ceiling, a flat gray plane in the darkness. My hand was inches from Ethan's on the mattress. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. The next moment, I was falling. Not a gentle drift, but a hard drop, like an elevator with a cut cable. My stomach lurched. There was no sound, no scream, just a silent, downward plunge into nothing. We landed without impact. The bedroom was gone. The house was gone. The world was gone. There was only white, an endless, featureless expanse that stretched in every direction. There was no sky, no ground, only a uniform, clinical glare. It was like standing inside a light bulb. The air didn't move. It had no temperature. It was just there. Dead. Ethan stood beside me. I didn't need to look. I could feel his presence, a solid point in the sea of emptiness. And it was there, in front of us. The shadow, the thing from all the other nights. It was a blot of pure black against the suffocating white. A rip in this sterile reality. It had no distinct shape, just a writhing, shifting pillar of darkness, vaguely man-sized. It used to send waves of cold terror through me. The sight of it used to make my lungs seize up, my muscles lock. But not tonight. Something had broken inside me when I read Chloe's journal. Something had shattered and then reset in a new, harder shape. The fear was still there, a low hum in the back of my mind, but it wasn't in charge anymore. I wasn't the prey cowering in the dark. I was the host. This thing and I, we were connected. This was my curse to bear, my burden to understand. Our pact, Ethan's and mine, was a silent acknowledgement of that. We weren't fighting the rules anymore. I took a step forward. The white space didn't register my footstep. No sound. Ethan didn't move to stop me. He stood his ground, a silent partner in this. My guard. Or my witness. I took another step. The shadow pulsed. A wave of darkness expanded and then contracted. A silent heartbeat. It knew I was approaching. It knew something was different. I stopped about 10 feet from it. Close enough to feel a strange vibration in the air, a low-frequency thrum that I felt in my bones rather than heard with my ears. It was the same feeling I got right before a migraine. "What do you want?" My voice was clear. It didn't waver. It cut through the dead air, the first real sound in this place. The words felt heavy, solid. They weren't a plea, they were a demand. The shadow didn't answer. It couldn't. It was just a thing of instinct, of hunger. That's what I'd believed. That's what we'd believed. It fed on fear. It thrived on pain. But as I watched, it began to change. The shifting stopped. The roiling darkness stilled. Then, it began to pull inward. The pillar of black smoke folded in on itself, condensing. It was like watching a film in reverse. The formless was becoming form. It shrank, tightening, pulling itself into a solid, defined shape. I heard Ethan take a sharp breath behind me. I didn't turn. My eyes were locked on the thing. It was taking on a human silhouette. First, the vague outline of a head and shoulders. Then, arms began to separate from the torso. Legs defined themselves, planting feet on the non-existent floor. The blackness was no longer a void but a surface, like polished obsidian. It was building itself. For us. For me. The texture changed. The smooth, hard black began to ripple. It looked like fabric now, dark denim pants, a gray t-shirt. I could see the folds, the creases. The level of detail was insane. I could see the faint stitching on the collar. Then it started on the skin. The blackness receded from the arms, revealing pale flesh underneath. Hands formed, fingers flexing one by one. I saw the fine hairs on the forearm. I saw the faint line of a scar on the left wrist, a scar I knew. It was a scar from a childhood fall off a bicycle. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. No, it couldn't be. The head was last. The featureless black oval began to get definition. A jawline. A nose. The closed lids of eyes. Lips formed, thin and familiar. Hair sprouted from the scalp, short and brown, with that one stubborn cowlick at the crown. The thing finished its creation. And it opened its eyes. They were Ethan's eyes. It was a perfect copy. A flawless replica of my husband, standing right in front of me. He looked exactly like the man who was standing just a few feet behind me. Same height, same build, same tired look around the eyes. The air vibrated again, stronger this time. I felt dizzy. What was this? A new trick? A new way to torture us? Using his face against me? The Pote. The Ethan copy looked at me. It didn't move. It just watched me. I saw the muscles in its cheek twitch. Then its lips parted. It smiled. It was the most horrific thing I had ever seen. It was Ethan's mouth, Ethan's teeth, Ethan's smile lines. But the expression was utterly alien. It was a smile of pure, smug satisfaction, of cruel, private amusement. It was the smile of a scientist who had just seen his experiment succeed beyond his wildest dreams. A smile of absolute power. I felt a cold dread snake up my spine, colder than any fear the shadow had ever produced. What the hell was this? My mind was screaming. A blank wall of panic was rising up, threatening to swallow the new resolve I had found. This was wrong. This was so wrong. The copy's eyes flickered from me to the space just over my shoulder, to the man standing behind me, the real Ethan. Then it spoke. Its voice was a perfect mimicry of my husband's. The same pitch, the same timbre. But the tone was laced with that same chilling amusement as its smile. Thanks for letting me borrow her fear. The words hung in the white void. 6 words that made no sense. 6 words that broke my brain. Let him borrow? Borrow my fear? What did that mean? Shepherdess. The Ethan copy's smile widened. It looked directly at my Ethan. The man I married, the man I'd made a dark pact with just an hour ago. It was delicious. The air cracked. The white space shattered like a mirror. Shards of light and emptiness flew past me. I was falling again, but this time I was being pulled upward, yanked out of the depths by a violent, invisible hook. I gasped, a huge, ragged intake of air that burned my lungs. My eyes snapped open. Darkness. The familiar darkness of our bedroom. the rough texture of the sheets on my skin, the weight of the comforter, the faint smell of lavender from the detergent. I was awake. My heart was a cannon, shaking my entire body with its force. Sweat slicked my skin. My breath came in short, painful pants. The dream. The white room. The copy. The smile. The words. Thanks for letting me borrow her fear. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a parasite. It wasn't the ghost of a murdered couple. The words echoed, not in the dream, but in my own head, with a new, terrifying clarity. It was a transaction. Alone. It was delicious. The truth hit me like a physical blow. It punched the air from my lungs and left me cold. So cold. There was no entity. Not a separate one. There was only a monster. A monster who had pretended to be a victim. A monster who had watched me descend into paranoia, who had held me while I cried, who had examined our shared wounds with clinical curiosity, who had led me to the journal, letting me connect the wrong dots, letting me believe I was the carrier, the host. An idea so awful, it distracted me from the more awful truth. He had guided me to our dark pact of surrender. My surrender. A shiver racked my body. A violent, uncontrollable tremor. I was lying next to him. The warmth I had felt radiating from his skin before we slept was no longer a comfort. It was the heat of a predator. The bed was no longer an altar. It was a butcher's block. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head on the pillow. He was already looking at me. In the near-total darkness, I saw the glint of his eyes. They were wide open. He wasn't asleep. He hadn't been. And on his face, illuminated by the sliver of moonlight coming through a gap in the curtains, I saw the faintest trace of it, that smile. I lay perfectly still. Every muscle was locked. My lungs burned for air, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of a gasp. I watched him. The man I married. The monster. In my bed. His face, in the thin moonlight, was a mask of sleep. The peaceful rise and fall of his chest was a lie. It was the rhythm of a sated predator, digesting its meal. The meal was my terror, a feast he had just finished. I didn't dare move a muscle. I kept my breathing shallow, mimicking the deep sleep I was supposed to be in. My stillness was a prayer, a desperate, silent bid to buy myself a few more seconds of life before he knew that I knew. Thanks for letting me borrow her fear. The words weren't an echo from the dream. They were a brand on my brain, a key that unlocked every single moment of the past few months. A switch was flipped. A dark room was suddenly flooded with harsh clinical light. And I saw everything. All of it. The whole sick performance. I saw his face that first morning, his feigned shock at the thin red line on my arm. The look of concern wasn't concern. It was appraisal, the way a chef inspects a cut of meat. I remembered how he traced the wound with his finger, his touch so gentle. "How could this have happened, Sarah?" he'd asked. He wasn't asking me. He was admiring his own work. I saw the argument. The one where I'd begged him to leave the house, to go back to the city, to our old apartment, anywhere but here. He had refused. He'd stood his ground, his voice firm, full of a strange resolve. "We can't let it win, Sarah. We can't run. This is our home." He wasn't talking about the house. He was talking about his new hunting ground, his perfect, isolated laboratory. He hadn't been trying to be brave for me. He was locking the cage door from the inside. All the little things. They came back to me now, sharp and clear. The way he meticulously documented every new wound in a notebook. "To find a pattern," he said. The way he would suggest new sleeping arrangements, new herbs, new white noise machines. Each one was a new variable in his experiment. He wasn't trying to solve the problem. He was refining his methods. He was perfecting his technique. The way he'd hold me after a particularly bad night, my body shaking with sobs against his, and I could feel his heartbeat, slow and steady. So steady. It wasn't the calm of a supportive husband. It was the calm of a scientist observing a reaction. Chloe's journal. He found it. He'd brought it to me. His face a mask of grim discovery. I think this explains it. He had handed me the perfect scapegoat. the perfect narrative. He had watched me read it, watched my face as the false hope and dawning horror took root. He let me believe I was the carrier, the host, the source of the contagion. He let me take the blame. It was a masterful piece of misdirection. He pointed me toward a monster in the shadows so I wouldn't see the one lying next to me every night. He wasn't haunted. He wasn't a victim. He was the source. He was the architect of the entire nightmare. This wasn't a shared dream. What a stupid, naive idea. We weren't tapping into some residual energy in the house. There was no ghost. There was no parasite from another dimension. There was only him. He had planted his nightmare in my head. He had cultivated it. He had watered it with my screams and fertilized it with my pain. He was the dreamweaver. He was the parasite. He fed on fear. My fear. The beautiful dream of our new life, the white picket fence and the quiet street, was just the packaging for the abattoir he was building for me. Every "I love you" was a lie. Every comforting touch was a violation. Every night, he had willingly, consciously, pushed me into that white room and watched his creation tear me apart. Then, he would wake up, hold me, and ask me how it was. The cold started in my toes and worked its way up. It was a deep, internal freeze that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. My blood felt like ice water. I was in a box. The walls weren't drywall and wood. The walls were him. How do you escape a prison that walks and breathes and tells you it loves you? The front door wasn't the way out. The windows weren't the way out. There was no way out. He was the lock, the key, and the jailer. I risked the slow, millimeter-by-millimeter turn of my head, just a fraction of an inch, away from him, toward the window. The moonlight was a single, silver blade cutting across the floorboards. It looked sharp enough to bleed on. My mind raced, a frantic search for an exit, a weapon, anything. The heavy glass lamp on my nightstand. Too loud. It would shatter. The letter opener in the desk drawer downstairs. Too far. I'd never make it down the stairs. My phone. Where was my phone? Charging on the kitchen counter. Miles away. An impossible distance. Every escape route my panicking brain devised was a dead end. He had planned this, not just the nightmares. The entire environment. My isolation was a weapon he wielded against me. My love for him had been the poison I'd willingly drunk. His breathing changed. It wasn't a sigh. It wasn't a snore. It was just a shift in the rhythm. A subtle change from the deep, even cadence of sleep to something lighter, sharper. He was waking up. My whole body went rigid. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning sleep, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't let him know. Pretend. Just pretend. The mattress shifted as he turned. I felt the dip as his weight moved, the air displaced by his body, now washing over my back. I could feel his presence behind me, a source of immense heat. He was so close. So close. I could feel his breath on my neck. Silence. A long, drawn-out silence that stretched for an eternity. The only sound was the frantic blood pounding in my ears. I waited for him to go back to sleep. I waited for the sigh, the rollover, the return to that fake, peaceful rhythm. It didn't come. The silence just kept stretching, pressing down on me. He was awake. He was lying there, in the dark, watching me. Then he spoke. His voice was not the voice from the dream. It was his real voice. Quiet, calm, utterly without emotion. The sound slid into the silent room like a scalpel. You know, don't you? It wasn't a question. It was a statement. The game was over. The air left my lungs in a single, silent rush. My pretense of sleep shattered. My eyes snapped open. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. My body refused every command from my brain. I just lay there, on my side, facing away from him, staring at the silver blade of moonlight on the floor. How could he know? Did my breathing change? Did my heart beat loud enough for him to hear it? Or could he just feel it? Could he taste the change in my fear, from the hot panic terror of the prey to the cold, stark dread of the damned? He moved. The mattress creaked again. I flinched, a violent, uncontrollable jerk of my whole body. I heard him sit up. I squeezed my eyes shut again, a useless, childish reflex. I felt his hand on my shoulder. It was warm, gentle, the same touch he'd used to comfort me 100 times. Now, it felt like the searing brand of a hot iron. He pushed, gently, but with undeniable force, rolling me onto my back. I had no choice but to open my eyes. He was leaning over me, a dark silhouette against the faint light from the window. I couldn't see his expression clearly, just the outline of his head, his shoulders. He was a shadow, the same shadow from the dream, but now it had a name. It had a face. "It's okay, Sarah," he whispered. His voice was a soft caress, a sound meant to soothe, but it was laced with something else. The echo of that smile from the dream, that sickening, smug amusement. Nothing has to change. My voice was a cracked whisper, torn from a dry throat. "What are you?" He shifted slightly, and the moonlight caught his features. The smile was there, faint but unmistakable. It was not the smile of my husband. It was the smile of the copy. The smile of the thing that wore his face. He ignored my question. His gaze drifted down from my eyes to my collarbone. His finger, the one from his other hand, came up and lightly traced the line of a faint, silvery mark on my skin. A scar. The very first one. The one that started it all. It was barely visible now, but I knew its shape by heart. He knew it too. His touch was light, clinical, proprietary, like a collector admiring his prize specimen. "This one was my favorite," he said, his voice a low murmur. The first brushstroke. Simple, elegant. It had so much potential. The house was not a monster. The darkness was not a monster. The monster was here. He had been here all along. He was leaning over me in the bed we shared, his finger tracing a map of my torture on my skin. And he was smiling. Every escape route had been a dead end in a maze he built. Every door I could have run through led right back to him. The real horror wasn't the nightmare I had just escaped. It was the one I had just woken up to. My breath hitched. The sound was frail in the quiet room. My mind, a frantic animal in a cage, slammed against the bars of his words. This wasn't a monster from a story. This wasn't a ghost. This was a man I had made breakfast for, a man I had kissed goodnight. He had a favorite side of the bed. He liked his coffee with 1 sugar. These tiny human details spiraled in my head, crashing against the massive, inhuman thing he had just admitted to being. Why? The word scraped its way out of my throat. It was small, pathetic, a mouse squeaking at a hawk. Ethan, or the thing wearing his face, shifted. He sat up fully, leaning his back against the headboard, with a casual sigh, as if settling in for a late-night chat. The moonlight carved his profile out of the darkness. He looked relaxed. He looked comfortable. "I love you, Sarah," he said. The words were smooth, practiced. They dropped into the air between us like stones into a still pond. "You have to believe that. Everything I've done, it's because I love you, more than I've loved anyone." My blood ran cold. The word love from his lips was a profanity. It was the ugliest sound I had ever heard. "I wanted us to be one," he continued, his voice a low, reasonable hum. "Truly one. Not just sharing a house or a bed. I wanted to share everything. The good stuff is easy. Anyone can do that. But what about the other things? The fear, the pain, the terror. To share that, to experience the same horror at the same time, that's a connection no one else has. That is absolute intimacy." He was explaining a philosophy, an idea he'd clearly spent a long time thinking about. He wasn't confessing, he was lecturing. My stomach churned. The maze I thought I was trapped in suddenly expanded. The walls weren't just this house, they were his mind. A place of twisting corridors and dead ends, where love and torture were the same thing. "You're sick?" I managed to say. The words had no force. He chuckled, a soft, airy sound. "No, I'm awake. I have a knack, a gift, I guess. I figured it out when I was a kid. I could get into other people's dreams. Not just anyone. There had to be a connection. a strong one. Love, hate, it works either way, but love. Love is the perfect key. It unlocks every door. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. He was enjoying this, the reveal, the slow, methodical destruction of my world. There were others, he said, his tone casual, like he was listing old jobs. Before you. A few. I was practicing, learning. It's a delicate art, you see. Planting an idea, nurturing it, watching it grow in someone else's mind. But they were always flawed. The relationships, I mean. They'd end. And when they left, he shook his head slowly. The connection would weaken. The nightmare would fade for them. But a little piece of it, it would stick to them, like tar. My mind flashed to Chloe's journal. The creeping dread she described. The scratches. The feeling of being watched. "Chloe," I whispered. He smiled. The moonlight caught it again. Ah, yes. Chloe. She was with David before she was with me. David was just a fling for her, but for him, he was obsessed. He never got over her. That powerful, one-sided connection. It was enough. I shared a nightmare with her, she left, and a little piece of it latched onto David. He got a faint echo. Frightened the hell out of him. He sold his house for a reason, you know. It all clicked into place, a series of dominoes falling over in my head. This wasn't random. It wasn't a cursed place we stumbled into. It was a destination. He had brought me here on purpose. This house, this quiet street, this perfect trap. He hadn't just found Chloe's journal. He knew it existed. He had led me to it. He had built this entire narrative. And I had walked right into it. So you see, he said. And now he leaned forward, his shadow falling over me completely. He was a mountain of darkness. You and I, we're different. What we have is real. It's permanent. We are bound together now, Sarah, by these. He reached out, and his finger traced another scar on my arm, the one shaped like a jagged crescent moon. His touch was no longer gentle. It was possessive. He was the artist, and I was his canvas. These marks aren't just on your skin. They're on your soul. They're on mine, too. He pulled up the sleeve of his own pajama shirt. In the gloom, I could see them. Faint, silvery lines that mirrored my own. Scratches. Bite marks. A constellation of shared agony. He hadn't just been an observer. He had been in there with me, feeling it all, getting wounded alongside me. And he had enjoyed every second of it. You belong to me now, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout. This is a cage, a perfect one. You can't leave. You can't run. Because if you do, you'll take the nightmare with you. You'll spread it. Just like it spread to David. You'll hurt someone else, Sarah. A friend. A family member. The next person you love. You'll become a monster. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a box. He wasn't just locking the door. He was telling me I was the lock. I'm the only one who can control it, he said, his voice sickeningly soft, full of false concern. As long as you're with me, I can contain it. I can keep it focused on us. I can keep the rest of the world safe. From you. He leaned back again, the picture of calm reason. Don't you see? I'm not the jailer. I'm your protector. The logic was flawless, a steel trap that snapped shut around my mind. Every word was a lie, but a lie constructed with such precision that it felt like truth. To run was to endanger others. To stay was to live in this hell. There was no escape. There was no good choice. He hadn't just trapped my body in this house. He had trapped my conscience. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man sitting on my bed, explaining how my torture was a form of love, how my imprisonment was a form of protection, the architect of my personal hell, offering me a life sentence as an act of kindness, and in that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud snap. It was a quiet, cold severance. The fear didn't vanish. It was still there, a block of ice in my gut. But it was no longer in control. It was just fuel. A new feeling rose up to take its place, a feeling as cold and as sharp as a shard of glass. Rage. Pure, crystalline rage. The world seemed to slow down. I saw the faint smile playing on his lips. I saw the self-satisfied glow in his eyes. I saw the monster, and I saw his smug belief that he had won, that he had broken me. He was wrong. I didn't scream. I didn't say a word. The time for words was over. I launched myself at him. It was a single explosive movement, from lying flat on my back to a snarling projectile of fury. I went for his face. My hands, which had been limp at my sides, became claws. I felt my nails, my own fingernails, scrape down his cheek. They felt harder than they should have, sharper. I felt them tear through his skin with a wet, ripping sound. He grunted in surprise, a hot spray of blood hitting my face. He wasn't expecting this. He was expecting tears. He was expecting submission. He wasn't expecting a fight. "If I'm in hell?" I heard a voice roar, and I realized with a shock that it was my own, raw and shredded. "Then you're staying here with me." He shoved me back, his strength immense. I hit the wall, the back of my head cracking against the drywall. Stars exploded behind my eyes. But the rage didn't dim. It burned brighter. I scrambled up, my feet finding purchase on the mattress. He was clutching his face, blood welling between his fingers. His eyes, when they met mine, were wide with shock and a new emotion, fear. He was afraid. Of me. The sight of his fear was gasoline on the fire. The struggle was a blur of motion and sound. A chaotic dance in the moonlight. I wasn't human anymore. I was an animal fighting its way out of a trap. I bit, I scratched, I kicked. The heavy glass lamp on his nightstand went flying, shattering against the wall. The sound was deafening. He grabbed my hair, yanking my head back. I slammed my elbow into his ribs. He grunted, his grip loosening for a second. It was all I needed. I twisted away, grabbing the jagged glass base of the broken lamp. His hand shot out and seized my wrist. The glass dug into my own palm, but I barely felt it. We were a tangled mess of limbs, thrashing, grunting. The white bed sheets were blooming with crimson flowers. His blood, my blood. It didn't matter. It was all the same color. It was the color of our intimacy. Something hard connected with my temple. The world went white, then dark. I felt myself falling, my consciousness slipping away. The roar of blood in my ears was the last thing I heard before the silence took over. The silence stretched. It was deep, complete. The sounds of struggle were gone, replaced by the quiet hum of the house. Moments passed, or maybe an hour. Then the bedroom door creaked open. A figure stumbled out into the hallway, lurching like a broken puppet. It was a silhouette, moving with a painful, shuffling gait. It leaned heavily against the wall for support, leaving a dark, wet smear on the pale paint. The figure staggered down the hall, its breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. It stopped in front of a small table. On the table, in a silver frame, was a photograph, a wedding photograph. A smiling man and a smiling woman, their arms around each other, blissfully happy on the best day of their lives. The figure raised a hand. The hand was trembling. It was covered in something dark and thick that dripped onto the floorboards below. Drip, 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 the only sound in the house. With a slow, deliberate motion, the bloody finger reached out to the photograph. It touched the smiling face of one of the people in the picture. The finger dragged downwards, then curved up, painting a wide, grotesque, bloody smile over the printed one. A hideous, red grin of triumph. The hand fell away. The figure stood there for a second, swaying, looking at its work. Then, with a final, shuddering sigh, it collapsed onto the floor in a heap, and did not move again.